When a desperate single dad pretends a beautiful stranger is his girlfriend to escape his toxic ex at a Manhattan wedding, he has no idea she's actually a 27-year-old billionaire CEO. What starts as a fake rescue becomes dangerously real when two broken hearts discover an impossible connection. But can a struggling father with nothing but dreams ever belong in a world of private jets and boardroom power plays? Or will their different worlds destroy the one thing that could save them both? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The champagne fountain looked like it cost more than Ethan Cole's entire year of rent. He stood awkwardly near the edge of the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, tugging at the collar of his department store suit and wondering, not for the first time that evening, what the hell he was doing here. The crystal chandeliers above cast prismatic light across hundreds of guests who moved with the kind of effortless grace that came from a lifetime of luxury. Women in designer gowns that probably cost five figures. Men in custom-tailored tuxedos discussing vacation homes in the Hamptons and recent acquisitions in tech startups. Ethan didn't belong here. He knew it. They knew it. The only reason he'd even made it past the gold-trimmed entrance was because Marcus Chen, the groom, had been his college roommate back when they were both broke students surviving on ramen and ambition. That was a lifetime ago. Now Marcus was marrying into old money, the kind that came with Roman numerals after surnames and oil paintings of ancestors in the family estate. And Ethan? Ethan was a single dad working double shifts at a corporate marketing firm, raising a 6-year-old daughter alone and trying not to drown in the mundane machinery of survival. He'd only come to drop off his wedding gift, a first edition of Marcus's favorite novel that Ethan had spent 3 months hunting down in secondhand bookstores. Something personal, something that money couldn't just buy with a credit card swipe. He'd planned to slip it onto the gift table, shake Marcus's hand, maybe exchange some quick pleasantries, and then disappear back to Brooklyn before the babysitter's meter ran too high. But Marcus had spotted him during cocktail hour and insisted he stay. "Come on, man, you can't just drop in and leave. Have a drink. Enjoy the party. When's the last time you did something for yourself?" Ethan couldn't remember. That should have been a warning sign. So here he stood, nursing a glass of wine that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget, watching a world he'd never be part of swirl around him in silk and diamonds and laughter that sounded like wind chimes made of privilege. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter's babysitter, Mrs. Chen from downstairs. "All good here. Lucy's asleep. Don't rush back. You deserve a night out." Ethan smiled despite himself. Lucy. His entire world packed into 46 pounds of wild curls, missing front teeth, and questions that never stopped. "Daddy, why is the sky blue? Daddy, where do stars go during the day? Daddy, when is Mommy coming back?" That last one still hurt. 3 years since his ex-wife had decided that motherhood and marriage were limiting her potential. 3 years since she'd chosen a tech startup in San Francisco and a new boyfriend over late-night feedings and parent-teacher conferences. 3 years of Ethan figuring out how to braid hair through YouTube tutorials and learning that the monster under the bed was only scary until you checked together with a flashlight. He was about to text Mrs. Chen back when he heard it, a voice that sent ice water through his veins. "Ethan Cole! My God, is that really you?" No, 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 no. He knew that voice. That perfectly modulated East Coast elite boarding school polished voice that could make even kindness sound like condescension. Vanessa Hale. Ethan's grip tightened on his wine glass as he turned, and there she was, cutting through the crowd like a shark through water. Still devastatingly beautiful at 32, her black Valentino gown hugging curves that had once made him stupid enough to think he could bridge the gap between their worlds. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate twist, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Family heirlooms, probably, the kind that came with provenance and insurance policies. "Vanessa," he managed, his voice coming out steadier than he felt. "I heard you might be here," she said, stopping just close enough that he could smell her perfume, something French and expensive that brought back memories he'd worked hard to bury. Marcus mentioned he invited his charity case from college. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." There it was. The knife slipped between the ribs with a smile. They dated for 8 months during his senior year. 8 months of Ethan trying desperately to fit into her world of country clubs and networking events, and parents who measured a man's worth by his portfolio and connections. 8 months of feeling like he was constantly taking a test he didn't know he'd signed up for. 8 months of Vanessa's subtle corrections. You hold the wine glass by the stem, not the bowl. You don't wear brown shoes with a navy suit. You really should meet my father's friend at Goldman Sachs, unless you're planning to waste that business degree on some creative nonsense. It had ended when he told her he was thinking about pursuing writing seriously, maybe teaching on the side. She'd laughed, not cruelly, but worse, with genuine pity, and said, "Ethan, be realistic. You're smart enough to make something of yourself. Don't throw it away on fantasies." 2 months later, he'd met Sarah, his ex-wife, who'd seemed refreshingly down to earth by comparison. Look how that turned out. "I was just leaving, actually," Ethan said, setting his wine glass on a passing waiter's tray. "Oh, don't run off on my account." Vanessa's smile sharpened. "I'm curious, what are you doing these days? Still chasing that writing dream? Or did you finally grow up and get a real job?" Something hot and acidic rose in Ethan's chest. The worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong to mock him. He had gotten a real job, a soul-crushing corporate position writing marketing copy for a company that sold software solutions he didn't understand or care about. The novel he'd started 7 years ago sat at 47,000 words, untouched for months because by the time Lucy was asleep and the dishes were done and the laundry was folded, he had nothing left to give to the page. He was about to respond, something cutting, something that would wound her the way she'd just wounded him, when his eyes caught on a woman standing alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was stunning in a way that made the room's other beautiful people look like they were trying too hard. Late 20s, maybe, with dark hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders. She wore a midnight blue gown that was elegant without being flashy, her posture perfect but not rigid, her gaze distant as she looked out at the Manhattan skyline. There was something about her, a quiet magnetism, a sense of self-possession that didn't need to announce itself. And more importantly, she was alone, standing apart from the clusters of socializing guests. Vanessa was still talking, something about her recent promotion at her father's investment firm, but Ethan wasn't listening anymore. A wild, desperate idea seized him, the kind of impulsive decision that went against every careful, responsible instinct he'd honed over the past 3 years of single fatherhood. "Excuse me," he interrupted Vanessa mid-sentence. "I see someone I need to—" He didn't finish. He just walked away, leaving Vanessa's shocked expression behind as he crossed the ballroom toward the woman by the windows. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was insane. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies. Not in real life, not to guys like him who'd forgotten how to take risks, because risk meant potential disaster, and disaster meant failing Lucy. But Vanessa was already following him with her eyes, her interest piqued by his sudden rudeness, and in about 30 seconds, she'd corner him again and spend the rest of the evening subtly demolishing whatever dignity he had left. The woman didn't notice his approach at first. She was studying the skyline with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing it, or maybe trying to escape into it. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Ethan said quietly, stopping beside her, "but I need to ask you the strangest favor." She turned and he found himself looking into eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, intelligent and assessing. Up close, she was even more striking. Classic features with a modern edge, minimal makeup that somehow made her look more polished than the women wearing full cosmetic armor. "I'm listening," she said. Her voice was low, cultured, with just a hint of amusement. Ethan glanced back. Vanessa was making her way through the crowd toward them, determination in her stride. "There's a woman heading this way," he said quickly. "My ex. She's the kind of person who enjoys making other people feel small, and I can't do this tonight. I know this is completely inappropriate, and you have every right to tell me to get lost, but would you mind pretending you know me? Just for a few minutes, please." For a long moment, the woman said nothing. Her gaze flickered past him to Vanessa, then back to his face. Ethan waited for the polite rejection, the subtle step back that would mark him as exactly the kind of desperate, pathetic man Vanessa had always suggested he was. Instead, the woman's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan. Ethan Cole." "Well, Ethan Cole," she said, and then she did something that stopped his breath. She reached out and gently adjusted his tie, the gesture casual and familiar, the kind of thing a girlfriend might do. "You're in luck. I happen to be excellent at pretending." Before he could respond, she slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, her touch light but confident, and turned them both to face Vanessa, who was now only a few feet away. "Ethan, darling," the woman said, her tone warm and natural. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The transformation was seamless. Suddenly, she wasn't a stranger at all. She was someone who belonged on his arm, someone comfortable with him, someone who'd chosen to be there. The act was so convincing that for a split second, Ethan almost believed it himself. Vanessa stopped short, her expression flickering with surprise and something that might have been uncertainty. "Vanessa Hale," Ethan said, finding his voice. "This is—" He faltered, realizing he didn't even know his rescuer's name. "Charlotte?" the woman supplied smoothly, extending her free hand toward Vanessa. "Charlotte Vale. It's lovely to meet you." Vanessa shook Charlotte's hand automatically, but her eyes were on Ethan, reassessing. "I didn't realize you were seeing someone." "We prefer to keep things private," Charlotte said before Ethan could stumble through a response. "You know how it is. Once people find out, everyone has an opinion about your relationship." She looked up at Ethan with an expression of such natural affection that his chest tightened. "We like keeping something just for ourselves." It was perfect. Too perfect. Ethan tried to keep his expression neutral, tried not to let his shock show. Vanessa's smile had frozen in place. "How nice. And what do you do, Charlotte?" "I work in business development," Charlotte said vaguely. "Nothing particularly exciting. Ethan's the interesting one. He's an incredible writer. I keep telling him he's wasting his talent in corporate marketing." Ethan nearly choked. How did she... But then he realized she was improvising, spinning a believable story out of thin air based on nothing more than his appearance and the few words he'd said to her. "Is that so?" Vanessa's tone had cooled several degrees. "Well, that's wonderful. I'm sure Ethan appreciates having such a supportive girlfriend." The word girlfriend hung in the air like a challenge. Charlotte's smile never wavered. "I appreciate having him. He's one of the good ones." She squeezed Ethan's arm gently. "Which reminds me, weren't we going to get some air? It's rather warm in here." "Right," Ethan said quickly. "Yes, we should—" "Of course," Vanessa interrupted, her voice tight. "I wouldn't want to keep you. Enjoy the rest of your evening." She turned and walked away, her shoulders rigid, and Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, relief mixed with a giddy disbelief at what had just happened. Charlotte waited until Vanessa had disappeared into the crowd before releasing his arm. "I hope that was sufficient?" "Sufficient?" Ethan turned to face her, shaking his head. "That was incredible. I don't even know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," she said, that small smile returning. "I know what it's like to want to avoid certain conversations at events like these. Still, I basically ambushed you. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous and weird and—" "It was human," Charlotte interrupted gently. "We've all been there, or at least I have." She paused, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "She really got under your skin, didn't she?" Ethan let out a long breath. "We dated in college. She came for money, I didn't. She made sure I never forgot it." He stopped, surprised at himself for sharing even that much with a stranger. "I shouldn't be dumping this on you." "You're not dumping anything," I asked. Charlotte glanced around the ballroom at the swirling crowds and the elaborate decorations and the carefully curated luxury. "Would you like to get out of here? I mean, truly out. Not just away from your ex, but away from all of this?" Ethan blinked. "What do you mean?" "The rooftop lounge," she said. "It's quieter up there. Private bar, better view, fewer people trying to impress each other." She tilted her head slightly. "Unless you need to get back to—" "No," Ethan said, perhaps too quickly. He thought of Mrs. Chen's text, of Lucy sleeping safely, of how long it had been since he'd done anything spontaneous or interesting or just for himself. "I mean, I have some time, if you're sure you don't mind." Charlotte's smile widened a fraction. "I wouldn't have offered if I minded." She led him through the ballroom with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly where she was going. People parted for her without seeming to realize they were doing it. A few heads turned as they passed, recognition flickering in some faces, but no one stopped them. They took a private elevator to the rooftop, and when the doors opened, Ethan felt like he'd stepped into a different world. The lounge was all dark wood and soft lighting, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan at night. The city spread out before them like a carpet of stars, the skyline a jagged constellation of glass and steel and ambition. Only a handful of other guests occupied the space, scattered in intimate conversation clusters that felt miles away. Charlotte led him to a corner where two leather armchairs faced the windows, a small table between them. A server appeared almost immediately, and she ordered wine without looking at a menu. Something French that Ethan was certain he couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. "This is," Ethan began, then stopped, not sure how to finish. "Quieter," Charlotte supplied. She settled into her chair with unconscious grace, kicking off her heels beneath the table. "I find these events exhausting. Too much noise, too many people performing." "Performing?" "Playing roles," she clarified. "Wearing masks, saying what they think others want to hear instead of what they actually think." She looked at him directly. "You weren't performing. That's why I agreed to help you." The wine arrived, delivered in crystal glasses that caught the light like liquid rubies. Ethan took a sip. It was excellent, smooth and complex in ways he couldn't begin to describe, and tried to process what was happening. He was sitting in a rooftop lounge at the plaza with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury magazine, drinking wine that probably cost more than his monthly electric bill. And she was talking to him like he was actually interesting. This didn't happen to people like him. "So," Charlotte said, settling back in her chair, "tell me about this writing you're not doing." Ethan almost laughed. "Straight for the throat, huh?" "I find honesty more efficient than small talk." She sipped her wine, her gaze steady. "You clearly have unfinished business with it, based on how you reacted when she brought it up. So either you're currently writing and it's going badly, or you're not writing at all and you feel guilty about it." "The second one," Ethan admitted. He wasn't sure why he was being so honest with this stranger, but something about her directness invited the same in return. "I started a novel years ago. Literary fiction, nothing commercial or practical. I got about halfway through before life happened." "Life happened," Charlotte repeated softly. "What does that mean?" Ethan hesitated, then decided there was no point in half-truths. "I got married, had a daughter, got divorced, became a single parent." He stared at his wine glass. "The novel is still sitting on my laptop, exactly where I left it 3 years ago. Every time I open the file, I read the last paragraph I wrote and realize I don't remember who that person was, the one who thought he had time to tell stories." "Do you miss him?" The question hit harder than Ethan expected. "Every day." Charlotte nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "What's your daughter's name?" "Lucy. She's 6. Ethan couldn't help the smile that always came when he talked about her. "Smart as hell, questions everything, terrified of nothing except the dark and broccoli." "You light up when you talk about her," Charlotte observed. "She's the best thing I've ever made," Ethan said simply. "Better than any story I could write." "Maybe," Charlotte said. "Or maybe she's the reason you should keep writing. Children learn from what we do more than what we say, don't they? If you give up on your dreams, you teach her to give up on hers." Ethan sat back, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. It was the same argument he'd had with himself 100 times, usually at 2 a.m, when insomnia and guilt kept him staring at the ceiling. "It's not that simple," he said. "I work 50 hours a week to keep us afloat. I'm on single dad duty the rest of the time. There's no space left for dreams." "There's always space," Charlotte said quietly. "It's just a question of what you're willing to sacrifice to make it." "Easy to say when you're not drowning." Charlotte's expression shifted, something briefly vulnerable crossing her face before she shuddered it. "You'd be surprised." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, she changed the subject. "What kind of story were you writing?" Ethan found himself answering despite his earlier resistance. "It's about a man who works as a night janitor in an office building and imagines entire lives for the people who work there based on what they leave behind at their desks. Photos, post-it notes, half-eaten lunches. He creates these elaborate narratives, and slowly he realizes he's constructed more of a life in his imagination than he has in reality." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. That's heartbreaking. That's life, Ethan countered. Maybe, but it's also beautiful. The idea that we're all stories waiting to be told, that someone could see meaning in the smallest things we leave behind. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected, genuine interest. Not polite engagement or social obligation, but real curiosity. It had been so long since anyone had asked him about his writing, about the dreams he'd shelved. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you do when you're not rescuing strangers from their exes?" Charlotte's smile turned slightly rueful. "I work too much. I travel constantly. I make decisions that affect a lot of people, and I try not to think about how many of those decisions might be wrong." That sounds heavy. It is. She took another sip of wine. Which is why I appreciate moments like this. Conversations with people who don't want anything from me. Should I want something from you? Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, surprised and warm. God, I hope not. They talked for an hour, maybe more. Ethan lost track of time as the conversation meandered through books they'd loved, places they'd never been but wanted to visit, small humiliations from childhood that somehow mattered more than the big moments. Charlotte told him about growing up with impossible expectations, about learning that success was measured in metrics she didn't choose. Ethan talked about his parents, his dad who'd died of a heart attack when Ethan was 22, his mom who'd remarried and moved to Florida and called once a month out of obligation more than interest. The wine bottle emptied. The server brought another without being asked. The other guests gradually dispersed until Ethan and Charlotte were alone with the city lights and the comfortable silence that had settled between their words. "I should ask," Ethan said eventually, glancing at his watch and wincing when he saw it was past 11. "Are you here with someone?" "A date." "I don't want to monopolize your evening if—" "I came alone," Charlotte said. "I usually do." "By choice?" "By necessity." She set down her wine glass with careful precision. "My life doesn't leave much room for dating. The few times I've tried, it always ends the same way. They either want something from me, or they're intimidated by who I am, or they try to fix me like I'm a problem to be solved." "Are you a problem to be solved?" Charlotte's smile was sad. "I think we all are, in our own ways." Ethan thought about Vanessa, about Sarah, about the ways he'd let other people define his worth. "I used to think I needed fixing," he said. "My ex-wife told me I was too stuck in my head, too impractical. My college girlfriend told me I wasn't ambitious enough. For a long time, I believed them. And now? Now I think maybe I was just with the wrong people." Charlotte held his gaze, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or understanding. Two people who'd been wounded in different ways but carried similar scars. "Can I tell you something?" Charlotte asked. "Of course." "When you asked me to pretend to be your girlfriend, my first instinct was to say no. I don't usually get involved in strangers' personal dramas." She paused. "But there was something about the way you asked. You were desperate but not entitled. You gave me a choice. That's rarer than you might think." "I was terrified you'd say no," Ethan admitted. "I know, I could see it." Charlotte smiled. "I liked that you were scared but asked anyway. It takes courage to ask for help. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Ethan laughed, and Charlotte joined him, and for a moment the weight they'd both been carrying seemed lighter. "I should probably get going," Ethan said reluctantly. "My babysitter's been incredibly patient, but I don't want to push my luck." "Of course." Charlotte stood, slipping her heels back on with a slight grimace. "Thank you for the conversation. I needed this more than you know." "I'm pretty sure I needed it more," Ethan said, standing as well. They walked to the elevator together, the silence between them comfortable now, familiar. When the doors opened and they stepped inside, Ethan felt the evening slipping away, this strange, unexpected interlude coming to its inevitable end. Charlotte pressed the button for the ground floor, then turned to him. "Would you—" She stopped, seeming to reconsider whatever she'd been about to say. "Would I what?" Ethan prompted. "Would you like to get coffee sometime, somewhere less—" She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "Less this." Ethan's heart did something complicated in his chest. "Are you asking me on a date?" I'm asking if you'd like to continue this conversation, Charlotte said carefully. No pressure, no expectations, just more of this. Every practical instinct Ethan had screamed at him to say no. He didn't have time for dating. He didn't have energy for complications. He was barely keeping his head above water as it was, and getting involved with someone, especially someone who clearly came from wealth, who probably had expectations he couldn't meet, was asking for disaster. But God, when was the last time someone had looked at him the way Charlotte was looking at him now? Not like he was broken or insufficient or disappointing, but like he was actually interesting, like he was worth knowing. Yes, he heard himself say. I'd like that. Charlotte's smile was radiant. Good. They exchanged phone numbers in the elevator, fingers fumbling slightly with their devices, and Ethan tried to ignore the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Vanessa, telling him he was punching above his weight, reaching for something he couldn't hold. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, all marble floors and glittering chandeliers, and the kind of opulence that felt like a foreign country. They walked together toward the exit, and Ethan was about to say goodnight when a man in an expensive suit intercepted them. Ms. Vale, the man said, his tone respectful but urgent. Your car is waiting. We need to leave if you're going to make your 6 a.m. call with Tokyo. Charlotte's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for Ethan to notice. A mask sliding into place, warmth cooling into professional distance. Thank you, James, she said. I'll be right there. The man, James, nodded and stepped back, but didn't leave. He stood at a discreet distance, waiting, and Ethan suddenly understood what he was. Security. A bodyguard. Charlotte turned back to Ethan, and her smile was apologetic. I have to go. Work. At 11 p.m. on a Saturday? The global market doesn't sleep. She touched his arm briefly. I'll text you about that coffee. Soon. I'll hold you to it. Charlotte nodded, squeezed his arm once, and then she was walking away, James falling into step beside her. Ethan watched her go, watched her climb into a black town car with tinted windows that pulled away from the curb with the kind of smooth efficiency that spoke of money and power and a life he couldn't begin to imagine. It wasn't until he was on the subway heading back to Brooklyn, crammed between a sleeping drunk and a woman with grocery bags, that Ethan pulled out his phone and looked at the contact Charlotte had entered. Just a first name, no last name, no company, just Charlotte and a phone number. He stared at it for a long moment, then typed her name into Google, mostly on a whim, not expecting to find anything. The results loaded, and Ethan's entire world tilted sideways. Charlotte Vale, CEO of Vale Industries. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion, one of the youngest female billionaires in the country. Recently named to Fortune's Most Powerful Women list. Currently overseeing a merger that would make her company one of the largest tech infrastructure firms in North America. The photos matched, those same gray-green eyes, that same elegant bone structure. But in every image, she looked different, harder, more remote. A woman in power suits standing before corporate logos, shaking hands with world leaders, addressing audiences from stages and convention centers. Ethan clicked on a recent interview with Business Insider. The headline read, Charlotte Vale, the billionaire CEO who never stops working. I don't believe in work-life balance, the article quoted her saying. I believe in work-life integration. My company is my life. Everything else is secondary. Ethan put his phone away, his hands shaking slightly. He'd just spent the evening drinking wine and sharing his failures with a woman who owned buildings, who made decisions worth millions before breakfast, who lived in a stratosphere so far above his own that they might as well have been on different planets. And she'd asked him, Ethan Cole, single dad working a corporate job he hated, living in a one-bedroom Brooklyn apartment with a daughter who still needed help reaching the bathroom sink, to get coffee. This was insane. This was impossible. This was going to end badly, and he knew it, felt it in his bones the way you feel a storm coming before the first drops of rain. But when he got home and paid Mrs., Chenin checked on Lucy, sleeping peacefully in her bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit he'd given her for her 4th birthday. Ethan found himself thinking about Charlotte's question. Do you miss him? The person who thought he had time to tell stories? He pulled out his laptop, opened the file with his unfinished novel, and read the last paragraph he'd written 3 years ago. The words felt foreign, written by someone he barely remembered being. But maybe, just maybe, that person was still there, buried under the weight of responsibility and disappointment and fear. Maybe that person was worth excavating. Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number that could only be Charlotte. "Thank you for tonight. I can't remember the last time I laughed that much. Coffee soon?" See. Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every smart instinct told him to politely decline, to thank her for the evening and let this strange encounter remain what it was. A beautiful aberration, a story he'd tell someday about the night he pretended to date a billionaire. But he'd spent 3 years being smart, being practical, being responsible. 3 years of doing what made sense instead of what made him feel alive. He typed, "I'd love that. How's Wednesday afternoon? I know a place in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy." Her response came almost immediately. "Perfect. Send me the address. I like not fancy." Ethan put his phone down and sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen, looking at his daughter's bedroom door and then at the cursor blinking on his unfinished manuscript. Something had shifted tonight. Some calculus of possibility had changed. He didn't understand it, didn't trust it, didn't know if it would last past the harsh light of Monday morning. But for the first time in 3 years, Ethan Cole felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still space in his life for something other than survival. Even if that something was impossible, even if it was doomed from the start, even if it was a story that would break his heart before the final page. Outside his window, Brooklyn stretched dark and familiar, the city he knew, the life he'd built from the rubble of his failed marriage and abandoned dreams. Somewhere across the river, Manhattan glittered with wealth and power and people like Charlotte Vale, who lived in penthouses and flew to Tokyo for business calls and made decisions that moved markets. 2 different worlds, 2 different lives. But for tonight, for a few stolen hours in a rooftop lounge above the city, those worlds had touched. And Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what might happen if they touched again. Wednesday came faster than Ethan expected, and with it, a nervousness he hadn't felt since his first date with Sarah 7 years ago. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror that morning, second-guessing everything. His shirt was too casual. His jeans had a small stain near the knee that he'd tried unsuccessfully to scrub out. His hair refused to cooperate no matter how much product he used. "Daddy, you look weird," Lucy announced from the doorway, clutching her cereal bowl. "Weird how?" Ethan asked, abandoning his hair with a sigh. "You keep looking at yourself. You never look at yourself." She tilted her head, studying him with the unnerving perceptiveness that 6-year-olds somehow possessed. "Are you going on a date?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "What? No, I'm meeting a friend for coffee." "Is the friend a girl?" "Yes, but then it's a date." Lucy said this with the absolute certainty of someone who'd learned everything about romance from Disney movies. "Are you going to kiss her?" "Lucy, eat your breakfast. You're going to be late for school." "You didn't say no," Lucy observed, grinning around a mouthful of Cheerios. Ethan pointed toward the kitchen. "Go, now." She skipped away, humming something that sounded suspiciously like a wedding march, and Ethan returned to his reflection with a growing sense of dread. This was a terrible idea. What was he thinking? Charlotte Vale, billionaire, CEO, Charlotte Vale, was not going to show up at a coffee shop in Brooklyn to drink mediocre lattes with a guy who still had student loan debt. She'd probably already forgotten about him. Or worse, she'd remembered him and realized how absurd the whole thing was. The text she'd sent on Saturday night had been polite courtesy, nothing more. She wouldn't actually come. His phone buzzed. A message from Charlotte. "Still on for 2 p.m.? Can't wait to see this nothing fancy place you promised." Ethan stared at the screen, his heart doing something complicated and inconvenient. She was coming. She was actually coming. He texted back. "Absolutely. It's called The Grinding Stone, corner of Atlantic and Court. Fair warning. The chairs don't match and the Wi-Fi is terrible. Sounds perfect." The morning crawled by in a haze of spreadsheets and conference calls that Ethan couldn't focus on. His boss, a perpetually stressed woman named Jennifer, who survived on Red Bull and passive-aggressive emails, stopped by his cubicle at noon. "Cole, Did you finish the Q2 analysis for the Morrison account? Ethan blinked at her. The what? Jennifer's expression hardened. The analysis I asked for yesterday. The one that's due to the client tomorrow morning. Shit, he'd completely forgotten. I'll have it to you by end of day, Ethan said quickly. You said that about the Rodriguez proposal last week, and I didn't get it until 11 p.m. I know, I'm sorry. I've just been distracted, Jennifer finished. Yes, I've noticed. Look, Ethan, I know you have a lot going on with your daughter, and I've tried to be understanding, but this job requires focus. If you can't deliver consistent work, we're going to have a problem. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Ethan staring at his computer screen with a familiar weight settling in his chest. The analysis would take at least 4 hours. He'd have to cancel with Charlotte, stay late at the office, disappoint his daughter by missing bedtime again, and probably still turn in work that was just barely adequate. This was his life. This was the machinery he'd built, and it left no room for coffee dates or conversations that made him feel human. He pulled up Charlotte's number, started typing an apology, then stopped. Jennifer's words echoed in his head. If you can't deliver consistent work, we're going to have a problem. But he had delivered consistent work. For 3 years, he'd sacrificed everything, sleep, health, dreams, any semblance of a social life, to be exactly the kind of employee Jennifer wanted. And what had it gotten him? A cubicle, a mediocre salary, and the constant threat that none of it was ever quite enough. Ethan deleted the apology and texted Charlotte. See you at 2. He'd stay up tonight and finish the analysis. He'd been running on 4 hours of sleep for years anyway. What was one more late night? But this small window of something that felt like possibility, he wasn't giving that up. At 1:45, Ethan left the office, ignoring Jennifer's pointed look as he grabbed his jacket. The subway ride to Brooklyn felt longer than usual, anxiety and anticipation tangling in his stomach. He kept checking his phone, half expecting a cancellation text that never came. The Grinding Stone was exactly what he'd promised, nothing fancy. A neighborhood coffee shop that had been there since before the area started gentrifying, with mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and a menu written on a chalkboard in handwriting that changed depending on which barista was working. Ethan had been coming here for 2 years, ever since he'd discovered they had a kids' corner with books and toys where Lucy could play while he occasionally tried to write. He arrived 10 minutes early and claimed a table near the window, ordering a black coffee he was too nervous to drink. The Wednesday afternoon crowd was sparse. A few students with laptops, an elderly couple sharing a scone, a woman in paint-stained jeans sketching in a notebook. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened and Charlotte walked in. Ethan's breath caught. She looked different than she had at the wedding, younger somehow, in dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. No makeup except what might have been a touch of lip gloss. No jewelry except small silver earrings. If he'd passed her on the street, he might not have recognized her as the woman from the rooftop lounge, and he definitely wouldn't have pegged her as a billionaire. She spotted him and smiled, and Ethan stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee. "Hi," he said, brilliant conversationalist that he was. "Hi." Charlotte's smile widened. "This place is perfect. It's not much, but—" "Ethan," she interrupted gently. "I said it's perfect. I meant it." But a barista appeared. Diego, who'd been working here since Ethan started coming. "What can I get you?" Charlotte studied the chalkboard menu with genuine interest. "What do you recommend?" Diego shrugged. "Depends. You want fancy or good?" "Good," Charlotte said without hesitation. "Maple latte. We make our own syrup. It's the only sweet drink I'll admit to making." "Sold." Diego nodded approvingly and disappeared behind the counter. Charlotte slid into the chair across from Ethan, looking around the shop with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You come here often?" she asked. "Couple times a week, usually. I bring my daughter sometimes. They have a kids section in the back." Ethan gestured toward the corner with its small bookshelf and bin of toys. "That's thoughtful." Charlotte's gaze lingered on the space. Most coffee shops seem designed to keep children as far away as possible. "Yeah, well, parents need caffeine too." Diego returned with the maple latte, and Charlotte wrapped her hands around the mug, inhaling the steam. She took a sip, and her eyes widened slightly. "Okay, that's legitimately excellent." Told you, Diego said, already walking away. Charlotte laughed, and Ethan felt some of his nervousness ease. This was still surreal, sitting across from a woman worth billions in a coffee shop where nothing cost more than $5. But she seemed genuinely at ease, like this was exactly where she wanted to be. So, Charlotte said, setting down her mug, tell me about your week. How's Lucy? Convinced I'm on a date and planning our wedding, Ethan said before he could think better of it. Charlotte's smile turned mischievous. Smart kid. Too smart. Yesterday she asked if I was nervous because I liked someone. When I didn't answer fast enough, she said, Daddy, lying is wrong. She's not wrong, Charlotte said softly. The air between them shifted, charged with something Ethan wasn't ready to name. He cleared his throat. What about you? How was Tokyo? Charlotte made a face. Long. The merger negotiations are more complicated than we anticipated. There are regulatory issues, cultural differences in business practices, shareholders on both sides who think they know better than the people actually doing the work. She caught herself, shaking her head. Sorry, that's incredibly boring. It's not boring, it's your life. Exactly. Boring. I don't think you actually believe that. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, turning her mug in slow circles on the table. I used to love it, she said finally. The challenge, the complexity, the feeling that I was building something that mattered. But lately, she trailed off. Lately what? Lately, it just feels like maintenance, keeping the machine running, making sure the numbers go up and the stakeholders stay happy and the headlines stay positive. She looked up at him. When did you stop loving your job? The question was so direct, so perceptive that Ethan almost laughed. About 2 years ago, maybe longer. I don't even remember anymore. Why do you stay? Because Lucy needs health insurance and a stable home and food on the table. Because I can't afford to be reckless anymore. He paused. Because I'm scared that if I try something else, I'll fail, and then I'll have nothing. Charlotte nodded slowly, like this made perfect sense to her. Fear is practical. Is that why you keep doing what you're doing? Partly. But mostly because I don't know who I am without it. She said this matter-of-factly, without self-pity. I took over Vale Industries when I was 23, after my father died. I was supposed to sell it. That's what everyone expected, what the board wanted. But I kept it. Built it into something bigger than it had ever been. Proved I could do it. Proved it to who? Charlotte's smile was bitter. Everyone who said I couldn't, which, it turns out, was basically everyone. Ethan thought about Vanessa, about Sarah, about every person who'd ever made him feel insufficient. I get that. I know you do. That's why I wanted to see you again. The honesty in her voice made Ethan's chest tighten. Charlotte, I looked you up, she interrupted, after Saturday night. I know that's probably weird, but I wanted to know if you were real or if I'd imagined how easy it felt to talk to you. She met his eyes. You are real. Ethan Cole lives in Brooklyn, works at Meridian Marketing Solutions, single father to Lucy Cole, age 6. No social media presence except a LinkedIn profile you haven't updated in 3 years. Ethan should have felt violated, maybe, or exposed. Instead, he felt oddly relieved. I looked you up too. I assumed you would. The articles make you sound like you're made of steel, like you don't sleep or eat or have feelings. Most days, that's not far from the truth. I don't believe that. Charlotte tilted her head, studying him. Why not? Because I saw you on Saturday night. The real you, not the CEO performing for the cameras. You were warm and funny and a little bit sad, and you laughed at my terrible jokes. Ethan leaned forward slightly. That person isn't made of steel. Something in Charlotte's expression cracked, just for a moment. A glimpse of vulnerability quickly shuddered. Maybe that person only exists on rooftops, away from reality. Or maybe she exists all the time, and you've just forgotten how to let her out. Charlotte was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her coffee. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright. Do you always say exactly what you're thinking? Not usually, but you make it feel safe. Safe, Charlotte repeated softly, like the word was foreign. I can't remember the last time someone called me safe. What do people usually call you? Intimidating, demanding, brilliant if they're being complimentary, cold if they're not. You're not cold. You barely know me. I know enough. Charlotte shook her head, but she was smiling. You're either incredibly naive or incredibly kind. Can I be both? She laughed. That same genuine, surprised laugh from Saturday night, and Ethan felt something warm unfold in his chest. This was dangerous. This whole thing was dangerous. But he couldn't bring himself to care. They talked for 2 hours. The conversation roamed through everything and nothing. Childhood dreams, favorite books, worst dates, best meals, places they'd been, places they wished they could go. Charlotte told him about growing up with a father who saw her as an heir, not a daughter, who'd trained her for the boardroom before she was old enough to understand what she was giving up. Ethan told her about the year after his divorce, when he'd barely kept it together, when Lucy's kindergarten teacher had gently suggested counseling and he'd been too proud to admit he needed it. Did you go? Charlotte asked. To counseling? Eventually. It helped. Ethan traced the rim of his coffee cup. She told me I was trying to be perfect to make up for Sarah leaving. Like if I could just be a good enough parent, Lucy wouldn't notice she'd lost her mother. That's impossible. Yeah, I figured that out. But it took a while. He looked at Charlotte. Do you see a therapist? I did, briefly, after my father died. She told me I was using work to avoid grief. Was she right? Probably. I fired her. Ethan laughed, startled. Of course you did. I pay people to help me run a company, not to run my life, Charlotte said, but there was no real defensiveness in her tone. Although lately I've been wondering if maybe I should have listened to her. It's not too late, isn't it? Charlotte's smile was sad. I'm 27 years old, Ethan. I run a company worth billions. I have 7,000 employees depending on me. I can't just take a sabbatical to find myself. Why not? Because the world doesn't work that way. Because shareholders would panic, the stock would drop, competitors would see weakness. Because... She stopped herself, shaking her head. Because I'm scared that if I stop moving, I'll realize I've been running in the wrong direction all along. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Ethan reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the gesture instinctive. Then maybe you need to slow down, not stop, he said quietly, just long enough to look around and see where you actually are. Charlotte's fingers curled around his, her grip surprisingly tight. Is that what you're doing? Slowing down? I'm trying. I've spent 3 years in survival mode. Maybe it's time to figure out what comes after survival. And what does come after? I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. Charlotte's phone buzzed on the table, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She glanced at it and grimaced. I'm sorry, I have to... It's okay, Ethan said, releasing her hand. Go ahead. She looked at him for a moment, seeming to weigh something, then picked up the phone. This is Charlotte. Her voice shifted, becoming crisper, more commanding. No, I told Michael we're not accepting those terms. The intellectual property clauses are non-negotiable. A pause. I don't care what their lawyers say. We walk away before we agree to that structure. Another pause, longer this time. Fine. Set up a call for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. my time. She ended the call and set the phone down with more force than necessary. Sorry, she said again. You don't have to apologize for your life. I feel like I do when I'm with you. Charlotte rubbed her temples. It's like I have 2 separate existences, and they don't fit together. Maybe they're not supposed to fit. Maybe they're supposed to coexist. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, Ethan admitted. But maybe we could figure it out together. The words came out more vulnerable than he'd intended, a question instead of a statement. Charlotte's expression softened. I'd like that, she said. I'd really like that. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Lucy's school. Hi, Mr. Cole. Lucy says she's not feeling well. Can you pick her up early? His heart sank. I have to go. My daughter... Is everything okay? Charlotte's concern was immediate and genuine. I don't know. The school says she's sick. Ethan was already standing, grabbing his jacket. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Go. Take care of her. Ethan hesitated, hating that their afternoon was being cut short, hating even more that he was about to rush out on her. Can we do this again? Soon? Yes. Text me when you know Lucy's okay. Ethan nodded and headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. Charlotte was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something tender and sad, and maybe a little bit envious. "For what it's worth," he said, "I like both versions of you, the one in the boardroom and the one sitting here. You don't have to choose." He left before she could respond, but he carried the image of her smile all the way to Lucy's school. Lucy was fine, just a headache that mysteriously disappeared the moment she saw him. The school nurse gave him a knowing look. "Sometimes they just need to see their parent," she said quietly, "especially the ones being raised by a single mom or dad." Ethan took Lucy home, made her favorite grilled cheese, and let her watch cartoons while he sat nearby with his laptop, pretending to work on the Q2 analysis while actually staring at nothing and replaying the afternoon with Charlotte in his mind. "Daddy? Was she pretty, the friend you had coffee with?" Ethan looked at his daughter, at her wide brown eyes and the hopeful expression she was trying to hide. "Yeah, Luce. She was pretty. Prettier than Mommy?" The question hit like a punch. Ethan set his laptop aside and pulled Lucy into his lap. "Baby, it doesn't work like that. But Mommy left because she didn't want us anymore, so maybe this friend is better. Your mom didn't leave because of you. She left because—" Ethan struggled for words that would make sense to a 6-year-old, that wouldn't wound her with truths she was too young to carry. "She left because she was unhappy with her own life, not because of anything you did. But you're still sad. Sometimes. But I'm also happy because I have you." Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said, "I hope your friend makes you not sad." Ethan's throat tightened. "Me too, sweetheart." That night after Lucy was asleep, Ethan texted Charlotte. "Lucy's fine, just wanted to see me apparently. Kids are complicated." Her response came quickly. "Adults are more complicated." "I had a wonderful time today." "Me too. Same time next week? How about Saturday instead? If you're free." Ethan stared at the message, his pulse quickening. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a bookstore in the West Village I love. Thought maybe you'd want to check it out with me. No pressure." A bookstore. Charlotte Vale wanted to spend her Saturday at a bookstore with him. Ethan thought about his calendar. He had Lucy on Saturdays, which meant he'd need to find a babysitter, which meant money he hadn't budgeted for, which meant— He stopped himself. When had he become so rigidly practical that he couldn't even consider spontaneity? "I'd love to." "What time?" 11 a.m.? We could get lunch after." "Perfect." Ethan set down his phone and opened his laptop, pulling up the Q2 analysis he'd been ignoring. He worked until 2 in the morning, fueled by coffee and the strange, unfamiliar energy of anticipation. When he finally sent the completed report to Jennifer at 2:17 a.m., he felt tired but oddly satisfied. He was doing this. He was finding a way to fit something good into his life, even if it meant less sleep and more juggling and a constant low-grade anxiety that it would all fall apart. The next few days passed in a blur of work and parenting and text messages with Charlotte that made him smile at inappropriate moments. They were small exchanges, nothing profound. A photo of the sunset from her office window. A funny thing, Lucy had said, recommendations for books they thought the other would like. But they felt significant in their ordinariness, like they were building something brick by brick. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures warm enough that Ethan didn't need a jacket. He dropped Lucy at his neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Chen again, who refused payment and just smiled knowingly, and took the subway into Manhattan, feeling like a teenager on his first date. The bookstore Charlotte had chosen was a 3-story brownstone in the West Village, the kind of independent shop that survived on loyalty and love rather than profit margins. The windows were packed with handwritten recommendation cards and stacks of new releases and vintage finds. A cat slept in the front window, unbothered by the foot traffic outside. Charlotte was waiting on the steps, wearing jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair down and wind-blown. She looked up when Ethan approached, and her face lit up in a way that made his heart stutter. "You came," she said, as if there'd been any doubt. "Of course I came." They went inside together, and for the next 2 hours, Ethan forgot about everything except the joy of wandering through narrow aisles with someone who loved books the way he did. Charlotte had excellent taste, eclectic and thoughtful, ranging from literary fiction to poetry to obscure histories. They debated the merits of various authors, playfully argued about overrated classics, and read passages aloud to each other when they found something particularly beautiful or strange. "Have you read this?" Charlotte asked, holding up a slim volume of essays by a writer Ethan had never heard of. He shook his head, and she immediately tucked it under her arm. "You have to. Her prose is like surgery, precise and devastating and somehow healing all at once." "You should write book reviews," Ethan said. "I should do a lot of things." Charlotte moved to the poetry section, running her fingers along the spines. "My father hated that I read so much. He thought it was frivolous, a waste of time when I could be studying business strategy or economics." "Did you listen to him?" "In most things, yes, but not about this." She pulled out a collection by Mary Oliver, flipping to a dog-eared page. "I used to hide books in my room and read by flashlight after he thought I was asleep. It was the only rebellion I allowed myself." Ethan watched her trace the words on the page, her expression soft and unguarded, and felt something shift inside him. This was the real Charlotte, the one buried beneath the armor of her professional life. This was who she'd been before the weight of expectations had shaped her into someone harder, sharper, more defended. "Read it to me," he said. She looked up, surprised. "What?" "Whatever passage you're looking at. Read it to me." Charlotte hesitated, then began to read, her voice quiet in the hush of the bookstore. "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." The words settled between them like a benediction. When Charlotte finished, she closed the book carefully and looked at Ethan with an expression that was almost shy. "I needed to hear that today," she said softly. "Me too." They bought their books. Ethan insisted on paying for his own despite Charlotte's protest, and left the bookstore with shopping bags and the giddy feeling of having shared something intimate and important. Lunch was at a tiny Thai place Charlotte knew, tucked down a side street that Ethan never would have found on his own. They sat at a cornered table and ordered too much food and talked about everything except work and money and the practical impossibilities of whatever was happening between them. "Tell me about your novel," Charlotte said, twirling pad thai around her fork. "The one about the janitor. What happens to him?" Ethan hadn't talked about his book in years, had barely let himself think about it. But Charlotte's genuine curiosity made it feel safe to try. "He falls in love with one of the lives he's invented," Ethan said. "A woman who works late hours in the legal department. He builds this entire story around her based on small details. A photo of her dog, post-it notes about medical appointments, takeout containers from the same Thai place every Thursday. He imagines she's kind and lonely and looking for connection. And is she? He never finds out. That's the point. He realizes that his imagined version of her is better than anything reality could offer, because reality would ruin the perfection of the story he's created." Charlotte set down her fork, her expression thoughtful. "That's heartbreaking. Or it's honest. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are safer than the truth." "Is that what you believe?" Ethan thought about Sarah, about how he'd told himself stories to explain her leaving that made more sense than the simple, brutal fact that she'd stopped loving him. He thought about Vanessa, about how he'd convinced himself he wasn't good enough instead of accepting that she was the one with the problem. "I used to," he said. "But lately, I'm wondering if maybe I've been telling myself the wrong stories." "What would the right story look like?" "I don't know yet. Still figuring that out." Charlotte reached across the table and took his hand, her thumb brushing across his knuckles. The touch was gentle but electric. "I hope I get to be part of that story," she said quietly. Ethan's breath caught. "Charlotte, I know this is complicated," she continued. "I know my life is impossible, and you have your daughter, and we're from completely different worlds. I know all the logical reasons this doesn't make sense." She paused, her eyes searching his. "But I haven't felt this connected to someone in years, maybe ever. And I don't want to lose it because we're too practical or too scared." Ethan wanted to tell her she was right, that they should just see where this went, that maybe for once the logical reasons didn't matter. But reality crashed back in, his phone buzzing with a message from Mrs. Chen asking when he'd be back, the price of the lunch they'd just eaten that was probably more than he spent on groceries in a week, the fundamental truth that Charlotte lived in a stratosphere he couldn't reach. "I want that too," he said carefully. "But I need you to understand, I can't be someone I'm not. I can't pretend to fit into your world or compete with the life you have. I'm not asking you to, aren't you? Charlotte, you own buildings. You fly to Tokyo for business calls. You make decisions worth millions before breakfast. He gestured around them. This is nice. This is wonderful, but it's not your real life. Maybe it should be, Charlotte said fiercely. Maybe I'm tired of my real life. But you're not going to change it. You said it yourself, 7,000 employees depending on you, shareholders who'd panic, competitors waiting for weakness. You can't just walk away. No, Charlotte admitted. I can't. But I can make space for something else, for someone else. Until you can't. Until there's another emergency, or another merger, or another crisis that needs the full force of Charlotte Vale, CEO, not Charlotte who reads poetry in bookstores. The words came out harsher than he intended, edged with old wounds and new fears. Charlotte pulled her hand back, her expression closing off. You're right, she said quietly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. This was a mistake. No, wait. Ethan reached for her, but she was already standing, gathering her purse. Charlotte, I didn't mean. You did mean it, and you're not wrong. Her smile was brittle. Thank you for today. It was lovely while it lasted. She left money on the table, far more than necessary, and walked out before Ethan could stop her. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty seat across from him and hating himself. He'd done exactly what Vanessa had always accused him of, sabotage something good because he was too insecure to believe he deserved it. Ethan paid the bill and walked out into the afternoon sunshine that felt too bright, too cheerful for the hollow ache in his chest. He'd protected himself. He'd been realistic. He'd done the smart thing. So why did he feel like he'd just made the worst mistake of his life? The subway ride back to Brooklyn felt longer than it should have. Each stop a reminder of the distance Ethan had just created between himself and Charlotte. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window, seeing a man who'd learned to protect himself so well that he'd forgotten how to let anyone in. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock, Lucy already running toward him with a drawing she'd made. A stick figure family with a notably absent mother and what appeared to be a very tall woman with yellow hair standing next to them. That's not, Ethan started, but Mrs. Chen just patted his shoulder knowingly. She has imagination, the older woman said, like her father. Back in their apartment, Lucy chattered about her afternoon while Ethan mechanically made dinner, his mind replaying the moment Charlotte's face had closed off, the way she'd left money on the table like she was paying for a service rendered rather than a meal shared between equals. He'd hurt her. He'd seen it in her eyes, that flash of pain before the professional mask slid back into place. And the worst part was that he'd meant to hurt her, had wanted to wound her first before she could inevitably wound him worse. His phone sat silent on the counter. No texts, no calls, nothing. Lucy fell asleep early, exhausted from her day, and Ethan found himself sitting at his laptop with his unfinished novel open, staring at words that felt like they'd been written by a stranger. The janitor, creating elaborate fantasies to avoid the messiness of real connection. The irony wasn't lost on him. He closed the laptop and opened a new text to Charlotte, typed and deleted a dozen different apologies before finally settling on, I'm sorry. You deserve better than what I said today. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then waited in the silence of his apartment for a response that didn't come. Sunday crawled by. Monday arrived with its usual chaos. Lucy refusing to wear anything but her princess costume to school, Ethan spilling coffee on his last clean shirt, the subway delayed by track work. He arrived at the office 15 minutes late to find Jennifer waiting by his cubicle. Conference room, now. The meeting was every employee's nightmare. HR present, Jennifer stone-faced, a folder with his name on it sitting on the table. They cited performance issues, missed deadlines, lack of focus. They used words like restructuring and mutual decision and generous severance package. They gave him 2 weeks. Ethan sat there, numb, thinking absurdly that at least Charlotte wouldn't have to worry about their different worlds anymore. Soon he'd have no job, no prospects, nothing but his daughter and his student loan debt and a half-finished novel that would never be completed. He cleaned out his desk in a daze, his co-workers carefully not looking at him as he packed his meager possessions into a cardboard box. 3 years of his life reduced to some files, a coffee mug Lucy had painted for him, and a nameplate that had always felt like it belonged to someone else. On the subway home, in the middle of a workday, still wearing his coffee-stained shirt like a badge of failure, Ethan's phone finally buzzed with a message from Charlotte. "You don't owe me an apology. You were honest. That's more than most people give me." He stared at the words, then typed, "I just got fired." The response came immediately. "What? When? Are you okay?" "10 minutes ago." And no, not really. His phone rang, Charlotte's name on the screen. "Hi," Ethan answered, his voice rough. "What happened?" Charlotte asked, and he could hear genuine concern beneath the question, not pity or judgment, just worry. "Performance issues, apparently. I've been distracted, missing deadlines." He laughed without humor. "Turns out trying to have a life outside work doesn't go over well in corporate America." "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It's not your fault." He paused. "Actually, in a weird way, you did me a favor. That job was killing me slowly. At least now I have to make a change instead of just thinking about it." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "What will you do?" "I don't know. Figure out how to pay rent, keep Lucy fed. Probably go back to the same kind of soul-crushing job because that's what responsible single parents do." The bitterness in his voice surprised him. "Sorry, I'm not great company right now." "Where are you?" "On the subway, heading home." "Can I see you? I know things are complicated, but I want to help if I can." Every instinct told Ethan to say no, to handle this alone the way he handled everything. But the thought of going back to his empty apartment, of sitting with his failure in silence, felt unbearable. "Okay," he said quietly. "Yeah, that would be nice." They met at a small museum in Brooklyn that Ethan had taken Lucy to once. The kind of place tourists never found, intimate and quiet, with rotating exhibits from local artists. Charlotte arrived 20 minutes after him, slightly out of breath, wearing what looked like business casual clothes beneath an expensive coat. "Did you leave work for this?" Ethan asked. "I rearranged some meetings." She studied his face with concern. "Have you eaten anything today? Does coffee count?" Charlotte took his hand, that same gentle, electric touch, and led him to the museum cafe, where she ordered sandwiches and tea and sat across from him with an expression that invited honesty without demanding it. "Tell me what you're feeling," she said. Ethan laughed roughly. "I'm feeling like I've failed at everything that matters. Failed husband, failed employee, barely adequate father, and now I've managed to screw up the one good thing that's happened to me in years by being too scared to let it be good." "You didn't screw anything up." "I hurt you on Saturday. I saw it." Charlotte shook her head. "You spoke truth. That's different than hurting someone. I've had people tell me what they think I want to hear my whole life. You told me what you actually thought, even though it was hard." She reached across the table. "That's brave, Ethan, not cruel." It didn't feel brave. It felt like cowardice. "Why?" The question was so simple, so direct, that Ethan found himself answering with an honesty that scared him. "Because I was pushing you away before you could leave me. Because everyone I've ever cared about has decided I'm not enough, and I'm tired of being blindsided by it. At least if I end things first, I'm in control." Charlotte's grip on his hand tightened. "I'm not everyone else. I know, but my brain doesn't know that yet. My brain still thinks that someone like you, someone brilliant and powerful and going places I'll never reach, is eventually going to wake up and realize you can do better. Well, better than a man who raises his daughter alone, who remembers his friends' favorite books, who writes stories about people who build imaginary lives because the real world is too painful." Charlotte's voice was fierce. "Better than someone who makes me laugh and asks real questions and doesn't want anything from me except my time?" "Charlotte, I've dated men who wanted my connections, my money, my influence. Men who saw me as a prize to be won or a resource to be exploited." She leaned forward. "You're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen a woman, not a net worth. Don't tell me I can do better than that." Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, all the careful armor he'd built to protect himself suddenly insufficient against the force of her sincerity. "I lost my job today," he said, needing her to understand the full scope of his disaster. "I have maybe 3 months of savings. I'm going to have to find something new fast, which means more corporate misery, more sacrificing dreams for survival. This is my reality. It's not going to change. Then we'll figure it out together. You can't fix this with money, Charlotte. I won't let you. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm offering to be present while you figure it out yourself. She paused. Is that so terrible? The sandwiches arrived, but neither of them ate. They just sat there, hands clasped across the table, the noise of the cafe fading into background static. I'm scared, Ethan admitted quietly. I'm scared that I'll start depending on you and lose myself. I'm scared that you'll get bored of slumming it with normal people and go back to your real life. I'm scared that Lucy will get attached, and then you'll leave and she'll have lost another mother figure. He took a shaky breath. I'm scared that I'm falling for you and it's going to destroy me. Charlotte's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm scared too. I'm scared that I'll mess this up the way I mess up everything that's not business. I'm scared that I don't know how to be in a relationship without trying to control it. I'm scared that my life is too big and too demanding and it will suffocate anything good before it has a chance to grow. She squeezed his hand. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. The words hung between them, raw and true. Ethan felt something shift, some fundamental recalculation of what was possible and what was worth risking. I don't know how to do this, he said. Neither do I. We're probably going to screw it up. Almost definitely. But you want to try anyway? Charlotte smiled, and it was luminous. Yes, if you do. Ethan thought about his daughter, about the drawing she'd made with the tall woman standing next to them. He thought about his unfinished novel and his newly empty calendar and the terrifying freedom of having nothing to lose except the possibility of something extraordinary. Yes, he said. I want to try. They ate their sandwiches and walked through the museum talking about practical things now, how Ethan would handle the job search, how Charlotte could rearrange her schedule to see him more than once a week, how they'd introduce this to Lucy when the time was right. It felt less like fantasy now, more like the careful construction of something real and sustainable. In front of a painting, an abstract explosion of color that somehow suggested both chaos and harmony, Charlotte stopped and turned to face him. I want to show you something, she said, but you have to promise not to freak out. That's a concerning way to start a sentence. Promise anyway. Okay? I promise. Charlotte pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of a commercial property, a corner storefront with large windows and good bones, vacant and waiting. The location tag said Brooklyn, not far from Ethan's apartment. What is this? He asked. It's nothing yet, but it could be something. Charlotte's voice was careful, like she was walking through a minefield. I was thinking about what you said, about dreams and survival, and making space for both, and I started wondering, what if you didn't have to choose? Ethan stared at the photo, his stomach tightening. Charlotte, if this is going where I think, just listen, please. She took a breath. What if you opened that bookstore cafe you mentioned, the one you told me about on the rooftop, a place for families, for writers, for people who need somewhere to belong? I can't afford... The property is mine, Charlotte interrupted. It's been sitting vacant for 2 years. I could lease it to you at cost, or we could structure it as a partnership where I'm a silent investor and you run the business. Ethan felt heat rise in his face. No. Why not? Because it's charity dressed up as opportunity. Because I won't let you buy me a dream. He handed her phone back. I know you mean well, but this is exactly what I was afraid of. You swooping in to fix my problems with your billions. Charlotte's expression hardened. That's not what this is. Isn't it? I tell you I lost my job, and within hours you're offering me a free storefront? How is that not you trying to rescue me? It's me seeing potential and wanting to help it grow. I do this all the time in business. Identify promising ventures and invest in them. I'm not a venture, Charlotte. I'm a person. I know that. Her voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through. But you're so determined to be noble and self-sufficient that you can't see the difference between accepting help and being controlled. Because there isn't always a difference, not when the power dynamic is this unbalanced. They were attracting attention now, voices carrying in the quiet museum. Charlotte glanced around and lowered her voice. Let's not do this here. Where do you want to do it? In your penthouse? Your office? Some other place that reminds me how small my life is compared to yours? The moment the words left his mouth, Ethan regretted them. Charlotte flinched like he'd struck her. "I should go," she said quietly. "This was a mistake. I thought, but it doesn't matter what I thought." She turned and walked away, and this time Ethan didn't try to stop her. He stood there in front of the chaotic, harmonious painting and felt the last fragile threads of possibilities snap. The week that followed was the worst Ethan had experienced since his divorce. He spent his days sending out resumes and getting automated rejections. His evenings pretending to be okay for Lucy's sake. His phone stayed silent. Charlotte didn't text, didn't call, and after that scene in the museum, he couldn't blame her. He'd done it again. Pushed away someone who cared about him because accepting care felt like admitting weakness. And this time, it might actually be permanent. Thursday afternoon, while Lucy was at a play date and Ethan was contemplating the professional oblivion of his LinkedIn inbox, his doorbell rang. He opened it to find a courier holding an envelope with his name on it. "Sign here," the man said, and Ethan did mechanically. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, in elegant script he didn't recognize but somehow knew was Charlotte's. "Ethan, I've spent the last 4 days trying to figure out what to say to you, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to care about someone without trying to fix their problems. I don't know how to offer help without it looking like control. I don't know how to be in a relationship with someone who has less power than me without that inequality poisoning everything. My father taught me that money solves problems. That's what it's for: leverage, influence, solutions. For 27 years, that's been my entire framework for how the world works. If something's broken, you buy a fix. If someone needs help, you write a check. But you're right, you're not a problem to be solved, and I'm sorry I treated you like one. The property I showed you? It wasn't about you. I bought it 3 years ago because I thought I might want to do something different with my life someday. Something smaller, something that mattered on a human scale instead of a quarterly earnings scale. I've driven past it probably 50 times, imagining what it could be. A community space, a bookstore, a cafe, something warm. When you told me about your dream, it fit so perfectly into that empty storefront in my mind that I didn't stop to think how it would feel to you. I just saw an opportunity for both of us to have something we wanted. But that was my mistake. I moved too fast, I assumed. I tried to control the narrative instead of letting it unfold naturally. I'm not good at this, Ethan. I'm not good at the slow build, the uncertainty, the vulnerability. I'm used to making decisions quickly and executing them efficiently. But you're not a merger to be negotiated. You're a person who deserves to be met where you are, not where I think you should be. So I'm not going to offer you the property again. I'm not going to try to help you find a job or give you money or do any of the things that come naturally to me when I care about someone. Instead, I'm just going to say this. I believe in you. I believe in your talent and your dreams and your ability to build something extraordinary without any help from me. I believe that you're going to figure this out, and when you do, it will be entirely yours, and that will make it more meaningful than anything I could have given you. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to be part of your life, not as a benefactor or a solution, but as someone who cares about you and wants to know you better. No strings, no expectations, just time and conversation and the possibility of something real. But only if that's what you want too. Take care of yourself and Lucy. You're doing better than you think. Charlotte Ian. Ethan read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring on the 4th pass. He sank onto his couch, the paper trembling in his hands, and felt the full weight of what he'd almost lost. She got it. She understood. And instead of fighting him or trying to convince him, she'd stepped back and given him space to figure himself out. That night, after Lucy was asleep, Ethan opened his laptop and looked at the cursor blinking on his unfinished novel. He read the last paragraph again, about the janitor and his imagined lives, and suddenly he understood what the story was missing. It wasn't about the janitor choosing fantasy over reality. It was about him learning to live with both, the dreams and the disappointments, the hope and the heartbreak, the beautiful complexity of actual human connection. Ethan started typing. He wrote for 3 hours, words flowing faster than they had in years, the story finally finding its shape. When he finally stopped, exhausted and exhilarated, he'd added 5,000 words and the novel's true heart. A woman who worked in the building, who'd noticed the janitor noticing her, who'd been leaving small clues for him all along, hoping he'd eventually speak to her instead of just imagining her. It was past 2 in the morning when Ethan picked up his phone and texted Charlotte. "Thank you for the letter. Can we talk? Tomorrow?" Her response came almost instantly, like she'd been awake too. "Yes. Anytime. Coffee at the Grinding Stone? 2 p.m.? I'll be there." Ethan fell asleep with his laptop still warm beside him, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't dream of drowning. Friday afternoon found them back in the same seats where this had all really begun. The mismatched furniture and smell of coffee and Diego's knowing look as he delivered their drinks. "You two figure it out yet?" Diego asked. "Working on it," Ethan said. "Work faster. You're killing the vibe in here with all this tension." He walked away, and Charlotte laughed, soft and genuine and perfect. "I got your letter," Ethan began. "I wasn't sure you would, or if you'd read it if you did." "I read it, about 4 times. He took a breath. "You were right, about all of it. I was so focused on protecting my independence that I couldn't see the difference between partnership and dependency. And I was so focused on fixing things that I couldn't see I was taking away your agency," Charlotte countered. "We're both pretty terrible at this." "Yeah, we are." Ethan reached across the table and Charlotte met him halfway, their fingers intertwining. "But I'd like to keep trying, if you would." "I would, very much. I have some conditions, though." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "We go slow. We figure out how to be together without you trying to save me or me pushing you away every time I get scared." He paused. "And I need to solve my own problems. The job thing, the money thing, all of it. I need to know I can still stand on my own before I can lean on someone else." "That's fair. Can I have conditions too?" "Of course." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I need you to tell me when I'm being too much, when I'm overstepping or trying to control things or falling back into old patterns. I'm not always good at seeing it myself. I can do that. And I need you to remember that accepting support isn't weakness. I know you need to be independent, but partnership means sometimes letting someone help you. Not because you can't do it yourself, but because you shouldn't have to do everything alone." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's harder for me, but I'll try. That's all I ask." They sat there, hands clasped, and something settled between them. Not resolution exactly, but understanding. The conversation shifted then, becoming easier, lighter. Charlotte told him about a board meeting that had devolved into chaos when 2 executives had gotten into an argument about office temperature settings. Ethan told her about Lucy's latest obsession with dinosaurs, and her insistence that she was going to be a paleontologist princess when she grew up. "She can be both," Charlotte said firmly. "That's what I told her." "You're a good father, Ethan." The compliment hit harder than expected. "I'm trying. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together." "That's what all good parents feel like. The bad ones think they have it all figured out." They talked until the cafe started filling with the after-work crowd, until Diego gave them a pointed look that suggested they should either order more coffee or free up the table. They walked outside into the cool evening air, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "I have to fly to London on Sunday," Charlotte said. "Meetings Monday through Wednesday, but I'll be back Thursday." She hesitated. "Could I see you then? Maybe meet Lucy if you think she's ready." Ethan's heart stuttered. Introducing Charlotte to his daughter felt huge, significant, like crossing a line into something real and serious and potentially devastating if it went wrong. But it also felt right. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, let's do that." Charlotte's smile was radiant. "Really?" "Really. But fair warning, she's going to have about 1,000 questions and 0 filter. I'm a CEO. I'm used to difficult negotiations. You've never negotiated with a 6-year-old. That weekend, Ethan sat Lucy down for a serious conversation about the friend he'd been seeing, the woman from the wedding who'd been in her drawing. Lucy listened with the intense focus she reserved for important topics and fairy tales. "Is she nice?" Lucy asked when he finished. "Very nice." "Does she like kids?" "I think so, but you'll have to tell me what you think when you meet her." Lucy considered this. "If I don't like her, do you have to stop seeing her?" The question was so direct, so painfully honest, that Ethan pulled his daughter into his lap. "Luce, You are the most important person in my life. Always. But I also get to have friends and people who make me happy." He paused. "If you really, truly didn't like her, we'd talk about it. But I'm hoping you'll give her a chance." "Okay." Lucy was quiet for a moment. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "I want you to be happy. Like not just pretend happy, real happy." Ethan's throat tightened. "I am happy. I have you. That's different. You can have me and be happy with someone else too." She looked up at him with eyes far too wise for 6 years old. "Mommy left because she wasn't happy. I don't want you to leave too." The fear in her voice broke something in Ethan. Hey, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "I'm never leaving you. Never. Not because I'm unhappy or because I meet someone new or for any reason at all. You're stuck with me until you're old enough to move out. And even then, I'm going to text you way too much and embarrass you in front of your friends." Lucy giggled, but her grip on him didn't loosen. "Promise?" "I promise." Thursday arrived with spring rain and Lucy's nervous energy as she changed outfits 3 times before school. Ethan picked her up early, something he could do now that he wasn't chained to an office, and took her to the grinding stone, where Charlotte was already waiting in the kids' corner, looking slightly terrified and absolutely beautiful. "Hi," Charlotte said, standing as they approached. "Hi," Ethan replied, then turned to his daughter. "Lucy, this is Charlotte. Charlotte, this is Lucy." For a long moment, they studied each other, Charlotte crouching down to Lucy's eye level, Lucy's expression serious and evaluating. "You're really tall," Lucy finally said. Charlotte laughed, surprised and delighted. "I am. Is that okay?" "Yeah, tall is good. You can reach high shelves." "That's very practical thinking. Daddy says I'm practical." Lucy tilted her head. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I think they're fascinating. Do you?" "They're my favorite, especially velociraptors because they're smart and they hunt in packs." "Teamwork is important," Charlotte agreed solemnly. And just like that, the ice broke. Lucy pulled Charlotte over to the toy bin and began an elaborate explanation of which dinosaurs would win in various hypothetical battles. Charlotte listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions and never once talking down to her. Ethan watched them together and felt something warm and terrifying unfold in his chest. This could work. Against all odds and logic and his own catastrophizing, this could actually work. They got hot chocolate and cookies, Lucy claiming the seat between Charlotte and Ethan like she was building a bridge. The conversation ranged from dinosaurs to Lucy's school to the story Ethan had been reading her at bedtime. Charlotte shared stories about growing up in a huge house that was always empty because her parents were always working. "That sounds lonely," Lucy said, with the blunt honesty of children. "It was sometimes," Charlotte admitted. "But I had books. They were good company." "Books are nice, but people are better." Charlotte looked at Ethan over Lucy's head, and something passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, hope. 2 hours passed before Lucy started yawning, the sugar crash hitting hard. Charlotte walked them out, and at the door Lucy surprised everyone by hugging her. "You can come back," Lucy announced, "if you want to." "I'd like that very much," Charlotte said, her voice slightly thick. In the car ride home, Lucy was quiet until they were almost to their building. Then she said, "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "I like her. She's nice, and she listened to me, and she didn't pretend to know about dinosaurs when she didn't." "So I can keep seeing her?" "Yeah, but Daddy?" Lucy's voice got smaller. "Don't get too sad if she leaves, like you did with Mommy." Ethan pulled over, turned around in his seat to face his daughter. "Lucy, I need you to understand something. What happened with your mom had nothing to do with you. She didn't leave because of anything you did or didn't do, and I'm not going to make you responsible for my happiness with Charlotte or anyone else. That's not your job. But I worry about you. I know you do, and I love you for it, but you get to be 6. You get to think about dinosaurs and school and what you want for dinner. Let me worry about the grown-up stuff, okay?" Lucy nodded, but Ethan could see she wasn't entirely convinced. The damage Sarah had done by leaving wasn't just to him. It had taught their daughter that love was conditional, that people left when things got hard. He'd spend the rest of his life trying to teach her different. That night, after Lucy was asleep, Ethan sat on his fire escape with his laptop and wrote, The novel was coming together now, the pieces finally fitting. The janitor and the woman from legal finally speaking, discovering that reality was messy and complicated, but somehow more beautiful than any fantasy could be. His phone buzzed. Charlotte, thank you for letting me meet Lucy. She's extraordinary. She liked you too. I could tell. I was terrified she wouldn't. You did great. Natural. There was a pause, then, can I ask you something? Of course. What changed? Between last week when you were pushing me away and now? Ethan thought about the letter, about his daughter's drawing, about the words he'd written tonight. I realized that being scared is a terrible reason to give up on something good, and that maybe the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve aren't always true. And what story are you telling yourself now? Ethan looked out at Brooklyn, at the lights and windows where other lives were happening, other stories unfolding. He thought about Charlotte across the river in Manhattan, about the impossible distance that had somehow become crossable, that maybe I'm allowed to want more than survival, that maybe I'm worth taking a risk on, that maybe happy endings aren't just for other people. You're worth it, Ethan. I hope you're starting to believe that. I'm trying. You're helping. They texted for another hour, about nothing and everything, until Ethan's eyes were heavy and his coffee was cold. Before they said goodnight, Charlotte sent one final message. I'm falling for you, just so you know. Ethan stared at the words, his heart racing. He typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on the truth. I'm falling for you too. It terrifies me. Good. That means it matters. It definitely matters. Good night, Ethan. Dream of happy endings. He fell asleep on the fire escape, his laptop balanced on his knees, the cursor blinking on a page where his characters were finally, tentatively, choosing reality over fantasy, messiness over perfection, hope over fear. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe in a new rhythm. Ethan spent his mornings sending out carefully crafted resumes and his afternoons with Lucy, picking her up from school and taking her to parks where they fed ducks and talked about her day. His evenings belonged to his novel, which was growing steadily now, the words coming easier than they had in years. And whenever Charlotte's schedule allowed, which was never as often as either of them wanted, they carved out hours together that felt stolen from their separate, impossible lives. She came to Brooklyn more often than he went to Manhattan, showing up at the Grinding Stone in jeans and sweaters that probably cost more than his monthly rent, but looked like they came from any ordinary store. They walked through Prospect Park while Lucy ran ahead, chasing pigeons and collecting leaves. They got pizza from the corner place that had been there for 40 years and ate it sitting on Ethan's fire escape, talking about books and dreams and the small disappointments that shaped people into who they became. Charlotte was careful now, thoughtful in ways that showed she'd been listening. When Ethan mentioned needing a new laptop because his was dying, she didn't offer to buy him one. Instead, she texted him links to refurbished models on sale, with notes like, "This one has good reviews," and "Saw this deal, thought of you." Small gestures that acknowledged his need without steamrolling his independence. And Ethan was learning too, learning to accept those small helps without his pride flaring up, learning that letting someone care didn't mean surrendering autonomy. Lucy adored Charlotte, which both thrilled and terrified Ethan. His daughter asked when Charlotte was coming over with the casual frequency of asking about dinner plans, and she'd started including Charlotte in her elaborate imaginative games, casting her as various dinosaurs and fairy tale characters with equal enthusiasm. "She's going to get attached," Mrs. Chen warned gently one afternoon when she caught Ethan watching Lucy and Charlotte build a blanket fort in his living room. "What happens if things don't work out?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I can't protect her from every potential hurt. That's not life." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "Just be careful. Both of you have already lost too much." The warning settled in Ethan's chest like a stone, but he didn't know what to do with it except carry it. 3 weeks into his unemployment, Ethan got a call from a small publishing house in Brooklyn. They'd seen his resume, his English degree, his brief stint teaching composition before Lucy was born, his corporate marketing experience, and wanted to interview him for an editorial assistant position. The pay was terrible, barely more than unemployment benefits. The hours were long. The prestige was non-existent. But when Ethan walked into their cramped office above a bagel shop and saw the stacks of manuscripts and the walls covered in book covers, something in his chest loosened. These were his people. This was his world. The interview went well, better than well. The hiring manager, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had ink stains on her fingers, asked him about his favorite books and his unfinished novel, and whether he understood that publishing was a calling more than a career. "I understand that most of the books we work on won't be bestsellers," Patricia said, leaning back in her chair. "That the hours are brutal and the pay is laughable, and you'll spend more time fighting for semicolons than you ever thought possible." She smiled. "But occasionally, maybe once a year if you're lucky, you'll find a manuscript that makes you believe in stories again. That reminds you why language matters. Is that enough for you?" Ethan thought about his janitor character, about the woman who'd been leaving him clues, about the ending he'd finally written where they sat together in a coffee shop and talked about the difference between the stories we tell ourselves and the ones we actually live. "Yes," he said. "That's enough." They offered him the job on the spot. He'd start in 2 weeks. That evening, he told Charlotte over video chat, she was in San Francisco for a conference, her hotel room all sleek lines and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. "That's incredible." Charlotte's face lit up with genuine joy. "Ethan, this is perfect for you. You'll actually be working with books, with writers. You'll be doing something that matters." "The pay is terrible," Ethan warned. "I'm going to be living lean for a while." "But you'll be happy. That's worth more than money," says the billionaire, Ethan teased gently. Charlotte's expression turned serious. "I mean it. I've had all the money in the world, and it never made me as happy as I am when I'm sitting in your cramped apartment eating takeout and listening to Lucy explain dinosaur taxonomy. She gets that from nature documentaries, not me. She gets her curiosity from you, her kindness too." Charlotte paused. "I'm proud of you for taking the risk, for choosing something that feeds your soul instead of just your bank account." The words hit Ethan harder than expected. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said they were proud of him, not for being responsible or holding it together, but for choosing something that made him happy. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot. When do you start?" 2 weeks, which means I have some time to finish the novel before my life gets consumed by someone else's manuscripts." "You're really going to finish it?" "I'm close. Maybe another week of solid writing. I want to complete it before I start the new job, before I lose momentum again." Charlotte smiled. "Will you let me read it when it's done?" The question made Ethan's stomach flutter with nerves. "It's not very good. First draft, rough around the edges. I don't care about polish. I want to read your words, hear your voice on the page." "Okay," Ethan said, though the thought terrified him. "When it's done, you can read it." That night, after they'd said goodnight, and Charlotte had returned to her conference dinners and networking events, Ethan opened his laptop and wrote until 3 in the morning. The story was nearly complete now, just the final chapter left. The moment where his characters had to choose whether to stay in their safe, separate fantasies or risk the messy reality of actual connection. He knew how it ended. He'd always known, really, but writing it felt different now, weighted with his own hope and fear about what he and Charlotte were building. The next morning, Lucy found him asleep at the kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms, the laptop battery dead beside him. "Daddy, you're supposed to sleep in beds," she informed him, very seriously. "You're absolutely right." Ethan straightened, his neck protesting. "What time is it?" "Time for breakfast. I'm hungry." They made pancakes together, Lucy insisting on adding chocolate chips despite Ethan's half-hearted protests about nutrition, and ate them while Lucy chattered about a girl at school who'd brought in photos of her new puppy. "Can we get a dog?" Lucy asked, as she had approximately 700 times before. "When we have a yard and I'm not constantly worried about vet bills, yes." "That's what you always say." "That's because it's always true." Lucy considered this, syrup on her chin. "When Charlotte comes over today, can I ask her if she has a dog?" Ethan blinked. "Charlotte's not coming over today, Luce. She's in California." "Oh." Lucy's face fell. "When is she coming back?" "Tomorrow, I think." "That's too long." Ethan's chest tightened. This was exactly what Mrs. Chen had warned about. Lucy getting attached, building expectations, setting herself up for disappointment when Charlotte's real life inevitably pulled her away for longer stretches. "Baby, you know Charlotte has a really important job, right? She has to travel a lot for work. She can't always be here. I know, Lucy said, but her voice was small. But I like when she's here. Me too. Do you love her? The question caught Ethan completely off guard. He stared at his daughter, who was looking at him with those two wise eyes, waiting for an honest answer. I care about her very much, he said carefully. That's not what I asked. Ethan sighed. When had his 6-year-old become so perceptive? It's complicated, Luce. Do you get the happy feeling when she texts you like butterflies in your tummy? Yes. Do you smile more when she's around? Probably. Do you think about her when she's not here? All the time, Lucy nodded sagely. Then you love her. That's what love is. Butterflies and smiling and thinking about someone. Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought. When did you get so smart? I was born smart. You just didn't notice yet. Charlotte returned from San Francisco on a Thursday evening, and Ethan met her at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn that she'd never been to. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from too many time zones and not enough sleep, but her face lit up when she saw him. Hi, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Hi. You look like you need about 12 hours of sleep. Probably closer to 20, she smiled. But I wanted to see you more than I wanted to sleep. They ordered wine and pasta, and Charlotte told him about the conference, the endless panels and networking events and conversations that felt performative rather than genuine. She'd given a keynote speech about leadership and innovation that had been well received, but she'd spent the entire time wishing she was somewhere else. Where did you wish you were? Ethan asked. Here, with you, doing this. She gestured between them, having a conversation that actually means something. Your work means something. Does it? Sometimes I think I'm just moving money around, making rich people richer, calling it progress. Charlotte took a long sip of wine. I used to believe I was building something important. Now I'm not sure I believe in anything except quarterly earnings reports. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. You're allowed to be tired of it. That doesn't make you ungrateful or spoiled. It makes you human. I don't know if I remember how to be human. I think I've been a CEO for so long that I've forgotten there's supposed to be a person underneath. There is. I've met her. She likes bookstores and reading poetry and building blanket forts with 6-year-olds. Charlotte's eyes were bright. I love building blanket forts with Lucy. She loves it too. Actually, Ethan hesitated, then decided honesty was better than protection. She asked me today if I love you. Charlotte's breath caught. What did you tell her? I told her it was complicated. She said that was a non-answer and proceeded to define love as butterflies and smiling and thinking about someone constantly. He paused. By her definition, yes, I do. The silence that followed was heavy with everything unsaid. Charlotte's grip on his hand tightened. Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I'm not expecting... I love you too, Charlotte interrupted, her voice fierce and certain. I'm completely, terrifyingly in love with you. I think I have been since that night on the rooftop when you told me about your daughter and your broken dreams, and I realized I'd never met anyone so honestly, beautifully human. Ethan's heart was doing complicated things in his chest. This is really happening. It's really happening. We're going to mess it up sometimes. Probably. Almost definitely. Your life is impossible. Mine is barely held together with duct tape and hope. I know. Charlotte smiled through tears, but I'd rather have impossible with you than easy with anyone else. Ethan stood up, came around to her side of the booth, and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, soft and careful and full of promise, and it tasted like wine and possibility and the kind of risk that might actually be worth taking. When they broke apart, Charlotte was laughing and crying at the same time. We're making a scene. Let them look. They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking about what came next. Charlotte had a merger finalizing in 6 weeks that would consume most of her time. Ethan was starting his new job, learning a new industry, trying to be present for Lucy while also finishing his novel. Their lives were pulling them in different directions, but they were learning to bend toward each other anyway. I need to tell you something, Charlotte said as they walked back to Ethan's apartment, their hands intertwined. About the property I showed you, the storefront. Ethan tensed. Charlotte, just listen. I'm not offering it to you again, but I've been thinking about what to do with it, and I realized I don't want to sell it or lease it to some corporate chain. I want it to be something good, something community-focused. Okay? So I'm going to donate it to a nonprofit that helps aspiring small business owners get started, provides them with space and mentorship and resources. She looked at him. No strings attached to you. I'm doing this because it feels right, not because I'm trying to manipulate you into anything. Ethan stopped walking. You're serious? Completely. The paperwork's already in motion. By the end of the month, it'll be out of my hands entirely. She smiled. And if someday you want to apply for their program, that's entirely up to you. But I'll have zero influence over whether you're accepted. Something shifted in Ethan's chest. A recalibration of trust. A recognition that Charlotte was learning just as hard as he was. Thank you for understanding why that matters to me. Thank you for teaching me that not everything needs to be controlled. They reached Ethan's building, and Charlotte hesitated at the entrance. Can I come up? Just for a little while. I know it's late, but I'm not ready to say goodnight yet. Lucy's asleep. We'll have to be quiet. I can be quiet. They tiptoed up the stairs like teenagers sneaking in past curfew, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of a billionaire CEO carefully avoiding creaky floorboards in a Brooklyn walk-up. Inside Ethan's apartment, they sat on the couch in the dark, Charlotte's head on his shoulder, and just existed together in comfortable silence. I could fall asleep right here, Charlotte murmured. You should probably go home to your actual bed. I don't want to. Your couch is lumpy and your apartment is too small, and I've never been more comfortable in my life. Ethan kissed the top of her head. You're welcome to stay. But I have to warn you, Lucy wakes up at 6:30 on the dot, and she will have many questions about why there's a person on our couch. Should go. But Charlotte didn't move. In a minute. That minute stretched into 20, then 30, until they were both half asleep, wrapped around each other in the dim glow of the city lights filtering through his windows. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of final job preparations, intensive novel writing, and stolen moments with Charlotte whenever her schedule allowed. Ethan finished the book on a Tuesday night, typing the last sentence at 11:47 p.m. and immediately closing the laptop before he could second-guess the ending. The janitor and the woman from legal had their coffee shop conversation. They acknowledged the impossibility of what they were attempting, the class differences, the complications, the fear. And then they decided to try anyway, because some stories were worth telling even if they didn't have guaranteed happy endings. Ethan sent the manuscript to Charlotte the next morning with a message. It's done. Be gentle. It's rough and probably terrible. Her response came an hour later. I'm clearing my calendar for tonight. Going to read this straight through. You don't have to do that. I want to. That evening, while Ethan was making dinner with Lucy, his phone rang. Charlotte crying. What's wrong? Ethan asked immediately, stepping into his bedroom for privacy. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Charlotte's voice was thick with emotion. Ethan, this is beautiful. It's honest and heartbreaking and so full of hope. The ending, she broke off. Is that us? Did you write us? Parts of it, not all of it. But yeah, some of it is definitely us. You see me clearly, not the CEO version or the polished version. You see who I actually am, she paused. No one's ever done that before. I'm just writing what I see. It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. Charlotte took a shaky breath. This needs to be published, Ethan. People need to read this. It's just a first draft. It needs so much work. Then do the work. Revise it. Make it everything you know it can be. But promise me you'll try to get this published. Ethan thought about his new job at the publishing house, about Patricia and her ink-stained fingers, and her belief that stories mattered. I promise. I'll try. Good. Because the world deserves to read this. You deserve to have your words out there. They talked for another hour, Charlotte reading him her favorite passages, Ethan cringing at some of his word choices but glowing at her genuine enthusiasm. When they finally hung up, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, pride in something he'd created. His first day at the publishing house was chaotic and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. Patricia handed him a stack of manuscripts and told him to read them over the weekend, to write up evaluation reports on which ones showed promise and which ones should be politely rejected. You're looking for voice, she said. Not perfection. We can fix craft issues. We can't fix someone who has nothing to say. Ethan dove into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised him. These were raw manuscripts, unpolished and ambitious, and sometimes failing spectacularly. But buried in the rough prose were glimmers of brilliance, moments where a writer had captured something true and vital. He was making notes on a particularly promising literary thriller when his phone rang. An unknown number. "Is this Ethan Cole?" "Yes." "This is Jessica Morrison from the Vail Industries Community Initiative. You recently applied for our small business support program?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I didn't apply for anything." Let me check the file." Papers rustling. "The application came in last week. Your name, your contact information, a detailed business proposal for a family-oriented bookstore cafe." "I didn't submit that." But even as he said it, Ethan knew exactly who had. "Well, regardless of how it got here, I have to say, it's one of the most compelling proposals we've received. We'd like to invite you to interview for the program. Would next Wednesday work for you?" Ethan closed his eyes. Charlotte. Despite everything she'd said about the nonprofit, about removing herself from the equation, she'd submitted an application on his behalf. She'd controlled the situation, again. "Mr. Cole?" "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I can't accept the interview. Please withdraw my application." "Are you sure? The program is very competitive. If we're offering you an interview, I'm sure. Thank you for calling." He hung up and immediately dialed Charlotte. "Hey!" She answered on the first ring, sounding happy and relaxed. "I was just thinking about you. How was your first day?" "Did you submit a business proposal on my behalf?" The silence on the other end told him everything. "Charlotte, I can explain. You went behind my back. After everything we talked about, after you promised to let me handle my own life, you submitted an application without telling me. I just wrote up what you told me about your dream. The bookstore cafe, the community space, all of it. I didn't think, that's the problem. You didn't think, you just acted, like you always do, trying to fix things and control outcomes and make decisions for other people." Ethan's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "I trusted you, Charlotte. I told you what mattered to me, and you weaponized it." "Weaponized? Ethan, I was trying to help." "I don't want that kind of help. I want to do things myself, on my own timeline, without you pulling strings and making it happen because you think you know better." He took a breath. "They called me today, offered me an interview, and I had to turn it down because accepting it would mean accepting that you get to make decisions about my life." Charlotte's voice cracked. "I was just trying to save me. I know. But I don't need saving, Charlotte. I need a partner who respects my boundaries." "I do respect them." "No, you don't. You say you do, but then you do things like this. You can't help yourself." Ethan rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "I don't think you understand how insulting this is, how it makes me feel like you don't believe I'm capable of achieving things on my own. That's not what I think at all." "Then why did you submit the application without asking me?" Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "Because I saw an opportunity, and I took it. Because that's what I've been trained to do my entire life. Identify potential and capitalize on it before someone else does. I'm not a business opportunity." "I know that. Do you? Because it feels like you see a problem and you can't resist solving it, even when the problem is me trying to build something myself." "Ethan, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I know you are, but this is exactly what I was afraid of from the beginning. Your world operates on a completely different set of rules than mine, and I can't keep up. I can't compete with someone who can just make things happen with a phone call and a signature." "I don't want you to compete. I want you to be happy. Then let me figure out my own path to happiness instead of paving it for me." They were both breathing hard, the phone line crackling with anger and hurt, and the fundamental incompatibility they'd been trying so hard to overcome. "What do you want me to do?" Charlotte asked quietly. Ethan thought about Lucy's face when Charlotte came over, about the way his chest felt lighter when she smiled, about the first kiss in the Italian restaurant, and the possibility of something real and lasting. Then he thought about his father, who'd worked himself to death trying to keep up with people who had more money and fewer principles. He thought about Vanessa's condescension and Sarah's abandonment and every moment in his life when he'd felt insufficient. I need space, he said finally. I need to figure out if this can actually work or if we're just going to keep hurting each other because we're too different. Ethan, no, please don't. I'm not breaking up with you. I'm asking for time to think. How much time? I don't know. A week? Maybe 2? I need to clear my head. Charlotte was crying now, soft sounds that broke Ethan's heart. Okay, if that's what you need, okay. But Ethan? Yeah? I love you. That hasn't changed. That's not going to change. I love you too. That's why this hurts so much. He hung up before she could respond, before his resolve could crumble, and sat in his silent apartment feeling like he'd just made a terrible mistake that was also somehow necessary. Lucy found him there an hour later, still holding his phone, staring at nothing. Did you and Charlotte have a fight? She asked. How did you have your sad face? You only get sad face when something's really wrong. She climbed into his lap. Is she gonna leave like Mommy did? I don't know, baby. I hope not. Did you tell her you love her? Yes? Then she won't leave. People don't leave when you tell them you love them. Ethan held his daughter close, wishing that were true, knowing from experience that sometimes love wasn't enough to bridge the gaps between people. The week that followed was the hardest since his divorce. Ethan threw himself into his new job, reading manuscripts until his eyes blurred, writing detailed reports, learning the rhythms of publishing. He picked up Lucy from school and made dinner and read bedtime stories, and tried not to check his phone every 5 minutes for messages from Charlotte. She respected his request for space. No texts except one 3 days in. I withdrew the application and told them never to contact you again. I'm sorry, take all the time you need. On Thursday night, Ethan's phone rang. Patricia from work. I'm calling outside business hours, which I normally don't do, but I wanted to catch you before tomorrow, she said. I read your novel, the one you mentioned in your interview. Ethan's stomach dropped. How did you left your laptop open in the office yesterday. I saw the file name and got curious. I know I shouldn't have read it without permission, but... She paused. Ethan, this is exactly the kind of book we publish. Literary fiction with heart. Real characters facing real problems. I'd like to acquire it. You want to publish my novel? I want to offer you a contract, yes. We'd need to do some revision work, tighten up the middle section, maybe expand the ending. But the bones are solid. The voice is there. This is publishable. Ethan sat down hard on his couch. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll let us work with you to make this everything it can be. He thought about Charlotte reading the manuscript, crying over the ending. He thought about the years he'd spent convinced his dreams were impractical fantasies. He thought about Lucy asking if he loved someone, defining love as butterflies and constant thoughts. Yes, he said. Yes, I want to do this. Excellent. We'll draw up a contract for Monday. And Ethan? This is good. Really good. You should be proud. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the silence of his apartment and felt something unfamiliar, pure, uncomplicated joy. His novel, his dream that he'd shelved and mourned and almost given up on, was going to be published. He wanted to call Charlotte immediately to share this moment with the person who'd believed in his words before anyone else. But he'd asked for space, and breaking that now would undermine everything he'd said about boundaries and respect. So instead he texted, My novel is being published. Patricia from work read it and offered me a contract. I wanted you to be the first to know. Her response came within seconds. Ethan, this is incredible. I'm so proud of you. You did this yourself, all on your own. This is your achievement. And maybe that was the answer he'd been looking for. Charlotte celebrating his success without trying to take credit or add to it or make it bigger than it was. Just pure happiness for him without agenda. Thank you for believing in it, for believing in me. Always. Call me when you're ready. No pressure. Just know I'm here. Ethan stared at the message for a long time, then did something that scared him. He trusted her. Trusted that she meant what she said, that she was learning, that maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out after all. But first, he had to figure himself out. Had to learn that accepting love didn't mean losing independence, that being supported wasn't the same as being saved, That partnership could exist without power imbalances destroying everything. He had a week to decide if he believed that was possible. 7 days to choose between safety and possibility, between protection and risk, between the story he'd been telling himself about who he was allowed to be and the one he might actually want to live. The week stretched into 10 days, then 12. Ethan told himself he needed the extra time to think, to process, to make sure he was making the right decision. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He was terrified. He spent his days at the publishing house, working through revisions on his manuscript with Patricia's guidance. She was brilliant and demanding, pushing him to dig deeper into his character's motivations, to earn every emotional beat, to trust his readers, to understand complexity without over-explaining. "You're writing about people who are scared of intimacy," Patricia said during one editing session, tapping a passage with her red pen. "But you're being too gentle with them. Let them hurt. Let them make mistakes. Real love isn't clean, it's messy and difficult, and sometimes you wound the people you care about most." Her words echoed in Ethan's mind long after he left the office. He was being too gentle with himself, protecting his heart at the expense of actually living. Lucy had stopped asking about Charlotte after the first few days, but Ethan caught her staring at the blanket fort they'd built together, now collapsed in the corner of the living room. She'd left it there like a memorial, refusing to let him dismantle it. "We might fix it when Charlotte comes back," Lucy had said, with a 6-year-old certainty that everything broken could be repaired. On the 13th day, Mrs. Chen knocked on his door with a plate of cookies and a look that said she wasn't leaving until they'd talked. "You're being stupid," she announced, settling onto his couch without invitation. "Hello to you too. That girl loves you. You love her. Your daughter loves her. What exactly are you waiting for?" "It's complicated, Mrs. Chen." "Life is complicated. Love is simple. You're making it complicated because you're scared." She fixed him with a stare that had probably terrified generations of students. She'd been a middle school principal before retiring. "Your father was scared too, you know. Scared he wasn't good enough, scared people were judging him, scared to ask for help. You know what that fear got him?" Ethan looked away. "A heart attack at 53. "Exactly. He worked himself to death trying to prove something to people who didn't matter. Don't make the same mistake." "This is different." "How?" "You're pushing away someone who makes you happy because you're afraid of what it means to accept help, to be vulnerable, to believe you deserve good things." Mrs. Chen stood, brushing cookie crumbs from her lap. "I've known you 3 years, Ethan. I've watched you parent that little girl alone, sacrifice everything for her, put your dreams in a box and shove them under the bed. And I've never seen you as happy as you've been these past 2 months with Charlotte. What if it doesn't work? What if I let her in and she leaves anyway? Then you'll survive. You survived your wife leaving. You survived losing your job. You'll survive anything because you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She headed for the door, then paused. "But what if it does work? What if you're throwing away the best thing that's ever happened to you because you're too proud or too scared to take a risk?" After she left, Ethan sat with her words for a long time. Then he did something he'd been avoiding. He pulled up Charlotte's social media, her business profiles, the carefully curated public persona of Charlotte Vale, CEO. There was a new interview posted 3 days ago. He almost scrolled past it, but the headline caught his attention. "Charlotte Vale on work-life balance. I'm learning that success means different things at different times." He read the whole thing, his heart pounding. The journalist had asked Charlotte about her reputation as a workaholic, about her 16-hour days and her obsessive focus on quarterly earnings. Charlotte's response was nothing like her usual polished corporate speak. "I've spent the past 4 years measuring my worth by my company's stock price," she'd said. "I convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, built something big enough, proved myself thoroughly enough, I'd finally feel satisfied. But satisfaction doesn't come from achievement. It comes from connection, from building a life that has space for love and rest and the small moments that actually matter." But the journalist pressed, "Does this mean you're stepping back from Vale Industries?" "It means I'm learning to delegate, to trust my team, to accept that I don't have to control every decision. And it means I'm making space in my life for things that feed my soul instead of just my ambition." Such as reading books that have nothing to do with business strategy, taking walks without my phone, spending time with people who see me as a person, not a net worth, Learning that being needed isn't the same as being loved. Ethan read the last line 3 times. Learning that being needed isn't the same as being loved. That's what he'd been trying to tell her, what he'd been trying to understand himself. The difference between dependence and partnership, between being saved and being supported. He picked up his phone and stared at Charlotte's number. 13 days of silence. 13 days of her respecting his boundaries, giving him space, not trying to fix or control or manipulate the situation. She was learning. They both were. Ethan took a breath and called her. She answered on the first ring. Ethan. Just his name, spoken like a prayer and a question and a hope all at once. Hi, he said, his voice rough. I read your interview. Which one? Charlotte's attempt at lightness was undercut by the tremor in her voice. The one about work-life balance, about being needed versus being loved. Oh, that one. A pause. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why I'm calling. Ethan stood and walked to his window, looking out at Brooklyn at dusk, the lights beginning to glow. I've spent almost 2 weeks trying to figure out if this can work. If we're too different, if the obstacles are too big, if I'm setting myself up for disaster. And what did you decide? That I've been asking the wrong questions. It's not about whether we can work. It's about whether we're willing to keep trying even when it's hard. Whether we're committed to learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them. Charlotte's breath caught. Are you? Willing to keep trying? Yeah, I am. If you are. Ethan, I've spent 13 days missing you so badly I could barely function. I rearranged my entire schedule, went to therapy twice a week, started reading books about healthy relationships and boundaries and how to love someone without trying to control them. She laughed shakily. I'm willing to try for the rest of my life if that's what it takes. Therapy, huh? 3 sessions so far. Turns out my dad really did a number on me, and I've been replicating dysfunctional patterns for years. Charlotte's voice softened. My therapist asked what I wanted from a relationship. I told her I wanted what I have with you. Someone who challenges me, who sees me, who makes me want to be better than I am. Ethan's throat tightened. I want that too. But we have to do it differently going forward, both of us. I know. Tell me what you need. I need you to ask before you help. I need you to respect when I say no. I need you to trust that I can handle my own problems even if it takes longer or looks messier than if you'd fixed it yourself. Done. What else? I need you to let me support you too. This can't be one-sided with you always strong and me always struggling. You have to let me see your weakness, your doubts, your fears. Real partnership means both people get to be vulnerable. That's harder for me, Charlotte admitted. But I'll try. I promise I'll try. That's all I'm asking, for both of us to keep trying, keep learning, keep showing up even when it's uncomfortable. There was a long pause and then Charlotte said, Can I see you? Tonight? I know it's late, but I want to see your face when we have this conversation. Ethan checked the time. Almost 8. Lucy would be asleep soon. Come over. But Charlotte, don't bring solutions or grand gestures. Just bring yourself. Just myself, Charlotte repeated softly. I can do that. She arrived 40 minutes later, and when Ethan opened the door, she looked different than he'd ever seen her. No makeup, hair in a messy bun, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater that had definitely seen better days. She looked young and uncertain and absolutely beautiful. Hi, she said. Hi. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, 2 people who'd spent almost 2 weeks apart learning how to be better versions of themselves. Then Charlotte stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and Ethan held her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. I missed you, she whispered against his chest. I missed you too, so much. They moved to the couch, sitting close but not quite touching, both of them feeling their way through this new territory of honesty and vulnerability. I need to tell you something, Charlotte said, about the property, the nonprofit, all of it. Ethan tensed. Okay, I did donate it. That part was true. But the application I submitted on your behalf, that was wrong. Not just wrong tactically, but morally. I violated your trust and your autonomy because I thought I knew what was best for you. She met his eyes. My therapist helped me understand that I've been doing that my whole life, with employees, with business partners, with everyone. I see potential and I pounce on it, claiming I'm being helpful when really I'm being controlling. Why do you think you do that? Charlotte was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because my father taught me that people are assets to be managed, that if you're not actively directing outcomes, you're wasting opportunities. He never asked what I wanted. He just told me what I was going to do and expected me to execute perfectly. She wiped at her eyes. I hated it, but I became him anyway. You're not him, Charlotte. I'm trying not to be, but it's hard to unlearn patterns that were drilled into you for 27 years. She took a shaky breath. The thing is, when I submitted that application, I genuinely thought I was helping. I saw your dream clearly, and I had the resources to make it happen, and it seemed wasteful not to act. But I didn't stop to think about what that action would cost you, your agency, your pride, your sense of accomplishment. And now you understand that? Now I understand that the best help is often no help at all. That sometimes loving someone means watching them struggle because that struggle is how they grow. Charlotte reached for his hand. I can't promise I'll never mess up again. I probably will, but I can promise I'll keep trying to do better. Ethan squeezed her hand. I need to tell you something too, about why I pushed you away so hard. You don't have to. No, I do. You've been honest with me. I owe you the same. He took a breath. My ex-wife left because she said I was holding her back, that my lack of ambition, my contentment with small dreams, was suffocating her potential. And before that, Vanessa spent 8 months making me feel like I wasn't polished enough, successful enough, worthy enough for her world. Charlotte's grip tightened. So when you came along with your billions and your power and your ability to just make things happen, all those old wounds opened up. I kept waiting for you to realize I wasn't enough, that I couldn't keep up, that you'd get bored of slumming it with a struggling single dad. Ethan forced himself to meet her eyes. I pushed you away before you could leave me. I sabotaged us because I was terrified of being abandoned again. Ethan, I would never. I know that now, or at least I'm learning to believe it. But I had to do this time apart to really understand that your worth isn't a threat to mine. That you being successful doesn't make me a failure. That we can both be whole people who choose to be together, not two halves trying to complete each other. Charlotte pulled him close, and they sat there wrapped around each other, two people who'd been broken by their past learning to trust in a shared future. Where do we go from here? Charlotte asked eventually. Forward, Ethan said simply. One day at a time, being honest when things are hard, asking for what we need, choosing each other even when it would be easier not to. I can do that. Me too. Lucy appeared in the doorway then, rubbing her eyes, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. Charlotte, you came back! Charlotte's face transformed with joy. Hi, sweetheart. I'm sorry I was gone so long. Lucy ran over and climbed onto the couch between them. Daddy was sad. He got his sad face. But now you're here so he can have his happy face again. I was sad too, Charlotte admitted, pulling Lucy into her lap. I missed you both very much. Are you going to stay now? Like, forever? Charlotte looked at Ethan over Lucy's head, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly, giving permission. I'm going to try, Charlotte said carefully. Your dad and I are going to work very hard to make this relationship work. But that means sometimes we'll have disagreements, and I'll still have to travel for work, and there will be times when things are complicated. But you love each other, right? Yes, Charlotte said firmly. We love each other very much. Then it'll work, Lucy said with absolute 6-year-old certainty. Love makes things work. That's how stories end. Ethan and Charlotte shared a look over Lucy's head, a look that acknowledged all the ways real life was messier than stories, but also how sometimes the best stories were the ones you lived instead of read. After Lucy went back to bed, they talked until almost midnight, making plans and setting boundaries and figuring out what their relationship would actually look like going forward. Charlotte would come to Brooklyn at least twice a week. Ethan would sometimes come to Manhattan, but never at the expense of time with Lucy. They'd check in regularly about feelings and needs and fears. They'd go to couples counseling when things got hard. They'd choose honesty over comfort, vulnerability over protection. I got a promotion, Charlotte said as she was getting ready to leave. Well, not a promotion exactly. I'm restructuring the company, bringing in a co-CEO to handle day-to-day operations while I focus on long-term strategy and innovation. It'll free up about 20 hours a week. Charlotte, that's huge. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. She smiled. My therapist asked what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years. And I realized I don't want to be the person who works 90 hours a week and has nothing else. I want to read and think and be present for the people I love. I want to have a life outside the company. I'm proud of you. That took courage. I learned from watching you. You walked away from a corporate job that was killing you because you knew you deserved better. That inspired me. Ethan kissed her softly. We're good for each other. Yeah, Charlotte agreed. We really are. Over the next 3 months, they built something real and sustainable. Charlotte came to Brooklyn religiously, showing up for family dinners and bedtime stories and the mundane beauty of ordinary evenings. She and Lucy became genuinely close, building elaborate pillow forts and having serious discussions about whether a stegosaurus could beat a triceratops in a fight. Ethan met Charlotte's world too, carefully, gradually. She introduced him to her small circle of actual friends, not business associates. They went to art galleries and concerts, and once, memorably, to a charity gala where Ethan wore a rented tuxedo and felt surprisingly at ease because Charlotte held his hand the whole time and didn't care what anyone thought. He met some of her executives and board members, and while a few were condescending, most were surprisingly warm. Her co-CEO, a brilliant woman named Maya Chen, pulled Ethan aside at a company dinner and said, I've known Charlotte for 8 years and I've never seen her this happy. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. His novel went through final edits and moved toward publication. Patricia scheduled a small launch event at a local bookstore. Nothing fancy, just readings and Q&A and wine in plastic cups. Ethan invited everyone who mattered, Lucy, Mrs. Chen, Charlotte, a few colleagues from the publishing house, some parents from Lucy's school who'd become friends. Charlotte showed up early to help set up chairs, wearing jeans and a simple black top, looking nothing like a billionaire CEO and everything like someone who belonged in his world. Nervous? She asked, finding him in the stockroom where he was hiding and panic-breathing. Terrified. What if no one comes? What if they come and hate it? What if I read a passage and forget how to speak English? Charlotte took his hands. Then we'll survive that together. But Ethan, people are going to love this book because it's honest and beautiful, and you put your whole heart into it. How do you know? Because I know you, and your heart is pretty spectacular. The reading went better than Ethan could have imagined. The bookstore filled beyond capacity, people standing in the aisles and sitting on the floor. He read a passage from the middle of the novel, the moment when his janitor character finally speaks to the woman he'd been observing, and they have a conversation about loneliness and hope and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. His voice shook at first, but then he found his rhythm, and the words he'd labored over for years came alive in the hush of the bookstore. When he finished, the applause was genuine and warm, and Lucy was bouncing in her seat with pride. During the Q&A, someone asked where the story came from. Ethan looked at Charlotte, then at Lucy, then back at the crowd. It came from learning that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve aren't always true. That sometimes we have to choose vulnerability over safety, hope over fear, messy reality over perfect fantasy. After the event, after everyone had left and the bookstore was closing, Ethan stood outside with Charlotte while Lucy examined the display window where his book was featured. Thank you for being here, he said. Where else would I be? I don't know. Running a billion-dollar company? Charlotte laughed. I did that earlier today. 6 hours of meetings, 2 conference calls, 1 minor crisis with a supplier. And you know what I thought about the whole time? What? This, being here with you. Watching you share your words with the world. This mattered more than any of it. Charlotte, I mean it. This is what I want my life to be about. Not just money and power and quarterly earnings, but moments like this. Watching the people I love do things that make them come alive. Ethan pulled her close and kissed her, and it still felt like magic every single time. 2 months later, Ethan finally made a decision he'd been avoiding. He applied to the small business program at the nonprofit. Not because Charlotte had connections there, but because he'd saved enough from his publishing advance and his salary to put together a legitimate business plan. He applied honestly, with his own proposal, his own vision, his own work. He didn't get the property. They gave it to a young woman starting a community art studio, and Ethan was genuinely happy for her. But the interview process taught him something important. He could do this. He could build something. Maybe not this year or next year, but someday. When Lucy was older and his savings were stronger and the timing was right. "I'm proud of you for applying," Charlotte said when he told her. "That took courage." "I didn't get it, though." "Doesn't matter. You tried. You put yourself out there. That's what counts." She was right. The trying mattered more than the outcome. 6 months after their first reunion, Charlotte suggested they take a weekend trip, just the two of them, while Lucy stayed with Mrs. Chen. They drove upstate to a small bed and breakfast near the mountains, the kind of place that had quilts on the beds and homemade breakfast and absolutely no cell service. They hiked and read and talked about everything and nothing. On their last evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Charlotte said, "I have something to tell you." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least I hope it's not." She took a breath. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Vale Industries. Not immediately. There will be a transition period, probably 6 months. But Maya is taking over permanently." Ethan stared at her. "Charlotte, that's huge. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I've been thinking about it for months. Working with my therapist, planning carefully. It's the right decision." She turned to face him fully. "I spent 7 years building that company into something extraordinary. I'm proud of that. But I don't want to spend the next 7 years the same way. I want to do something different." "What do you want to do?" Charlotte smiled. "I'm not entirely sure yet. Maybe consulting for other women-led businesses. Maybe teaching. Maybe writing. I've been thinking about a book about leadership and vulnerability. Or maybe just taking time to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my job title." That's terrifying. Completely. But you did it. You walked away from corporate marketing to work at a publishing house for a fraction of the salary because it fed your soul. You inspired me to ask myself what would feed mine. Ethan took her hand. "I'm proud of you. This is brave." "I'm scared out of my mind," Charlotte admitted. "I've been Charlotte Vale, CEO, since I was 23. I don't know who Charlotte Vale, regular person, even is." "Want to find out together?" "Yes, I really, really do." That night, lying in bed in the small guest room with its slanted ceiling and creaky floors, Charlotte said, "Move in with me." Ethan propped himself up on one elbow. "What?" "Move in with me. You and Lucy. My apartment is ridiculous. 5 bedrooms, none of them used. There's a whole wing that could be Lucy's, with room for her toys and books and whatever 6-year-olds need. And there's a study that would be perfect for writing. Charlotte, before you say no, hear me out. I'm not trying to save you or fix your problems. I'm asking because I love you and I love Lucy, and I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to be part of your daily life, not just the person you see twice a week. I want us to be a family." Ethan's heart was pounding. "That's a big step." "I know. And if you're not ready, I understand, but I am ready. I'm ready to build a life with you that's ours, not mine or yours, but something we create together." "What about Lucy? We'd have to talk to her, make sure she's comfortable with such a big change." "Of course. This is her life too. She gets a say." Ethan thought about his cramped Brooklyn apartment, about the life he'd built there in the aftermath of his divorce. It had been enough for a long time. But maybe, just maybe, it was time for something more. "Ask me again in the morning," he said, "when I can think clearly and not just react emotionally to the beautiful woman in my bed." Charlotte laughed and pulled him close. "Okay, I'll ask again in the morning." She did. And after a long conversation over breakfast, after they talked through logistics and concerns and possibilities, Ethan said yes. They told Lucy together, sitting her down in the living room of Ethan's apartment with serious faces. "How would you feel about moving?" Ethan began carefully. "To Charlotte's apartment in Manhattan. It would mean a new school, but you'd have your own room, much bigger than your room here, and can I bring my dinosaurs?" "All of them." "And my blanket fort stuff?" Charlotte smiled. "We'll build the biggest blanket fort you've ever seen." "Okay, I'm in." Ethan blinked. "Just like that? You don't want to think about it?" Lucy shrugged. "You're happy when Charlotte's around. Charlotte's happy when you're around, and I like Charlotte. So, yeah, let's do it. Sometimes, Ethan thought, kids understood things that adults made too complicated. The move happened gradually over the next 2 months. Charlotte worked with a designer to turn one wing of her apartment into a space that felt like home for Lucy. Warm colors, built-in bookshelves, a reading nook with pillows, a desk for homework. She consulted with Lucy on every decision, making sure it felt like her space, not a room imposed by an adult. For Ethan, she converted a sun-filled room with windows overlooking the city into a study, complete with a proper desk and a comfortable chair and walls of shelves waiting to be filled with books. "This is too much," Ethan said when he first saw it. "It's not too much. It's what you deserve. A space to write, to think, to dream." Charlotte wrapped her arms around him from behind. "I spent years building office spaces and boardrooms. Let me build something that matters. A home for people I love." They settled into rhythms and routines. Mornings were chaos. Lucy getting ready for her new school, Ethan making coffee, Charlotte on early calls with international teams until her official transition was complete. Evenings were sacred. Family dinners, homework help, books before bed, and then quiet hours when Ethan wrote and Charlotte read or worked on her own projects. It wasn't perfect. They had arguments about housework distribution and boundary setting with Lucy and how much Charlotte's remaining work obligations should intrude on family time. But they worked through them with honesty and therapy and a commitment to choosing each other even when it was hard. Lucy thrived in her new school, making friends quickly and joining a science club where she got to learn about paleontology. She asked occasionally about her mother. Sarah had sent a birthday card with a generic message, nothing personal. But the questions became less frequent as she settled into the security of a home with two adults who showed up consistently. 1 year after they'd first met at that wedding, Ethan and Charlotte went back to the plaza for Marcus's anniversary party. They walked into the same ballroom where Ethan had once felt so out of place, but this time was different. He belonged now, not because he'd changed to fit Charlotte's world, but because they'd built a world together that accommodated both of them. Vanessa was there, of course. She approached them during cocktail hour, her expression calculating. "Ethan Cole? Still playing house with the billionaire?" Charlotte's hand tightened on Ethan's arm, but he spoke before she could. "Not playing, living. There's a difference. Is there? You're still punching above your weight, aren't you? Living in her apartment, dependent on her money?" "Actually," Charlotte interrupted, her voice cold and precise, "Ethan has a successful publishing career, a novel that's getting excellent reviews, and a beautiful daughter he's raising with more grace than most people could manage. He doesn't need my money or my influence to have worth. He had that long before he met me." Vanessa's smile faltered. "But since you brought it up," Charlotte continued, "Ethan and I have a prenuptial agreement being drawn up. Everything stays separate. His earnings, his assets, his achievements, all his. So if you're implying he's with me for money, you're not just wrong, you're insulting to both of us." Ethan turned to Charlotte, surprised. "Prenup?" Charlotte's expression softened. "I was going to wait until tonight to ask properly, but yes, I want to marry you, Ethan, if you'll have me, with a prenup that protects both of us and makes it clear that we're choosing each other for love, not practical reasons." Vanessa made a strangled sound and walked away, but Ethan barely noticed. He was too busy looking at Charlotte, at this woman who'd learned to love without controlling, to support without saving, to build a partnership based on mutual respect instead of power dynamics. "You want to marry me," he said. "I do, very much, but only if—" Ethan kissed her, cutting off whatever careful qualification she was about to offer. When they broke apart, he was grinning. "Yes, absolutely yes. 1,000 times yes." "Really? You don't want to think about it? Talk to Lucy, consider the implications." "I've spent a year thinking about it. I'm done thinking. I'm ready to just live." They told Lucy that night, after the party, sitting on the couch in their apartment while she fought sleep in her pajamas. "Charlotte and I are going to get married," Ethan said. "How do you feel about that?" Lucy's eyes went wide. "Like a real wedding? With a dress and cake?" "Probably a small wedding, but yes." "Can I be in it?" Charlotte smiled. "We wouldn't dream of having a wedding without you. You're the most important person in both our lives." Lucy thought about this seriously. "Okay, yes, you can get married, but I have some conditions." Ethan tried not to laugh. "Conditions?" First, Charlotte has to promise to always help with dinosaur research. Second, we have to get a dog. Third, you have to let me stay up late on weekends. And fourth, you can't be boring adults who only talk about bills and work. Charlotte extended her hand solemnly. I accept your terms, except maybe the staying up late one. We'll negotiate on that. They shook on it, and Lucy fell asleep between them, satisfied that her family was finally complete. The wedding happened 6 months later, small and intimate, at the same rooftop where Ethan and Charlotte had first really talked. Just close friends, Mrs. Chen, Lucy as flower girl, Patricia and a few colleagues from the publishing house, Charlotte's small circle of real friends, and Maya representing Vale Industries. Ethan wore a suit he'd bought himself, properly tailored, that fit him perfectly. Charlotte wore a simple ivory dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. Lucy wore a dinosaur print dress that she'd insisted on, and no one argued. They wrote their own vows. Charlotte went first. Ethan, you taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or fixing problems or controlling outcomes. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other even when it's hard. You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's courage. You taught me that I'm allowed to want a life that includes rest and joy and small moments that don't show up on quarterly earnings reports. Her voice shook slightly. You see me, really see me, and you love me anyway. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. Ethan's turn. Charlotte, when I met you, I was convinced I wasn't enough. Not ambitious enough, not successful enough, not worthy of love from someone extraordinary. You didn't fix me or save me or try to make me into someone different. You just loved me exactly as I was, and that love gave me the courage to believe I deserved good things. He took her hands. You challenged me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. You're brilliant and powerful and kind, and somehow you chose me. I promise to keep choosing you back every single day for the rest of our lives. They kissed, and Lucy cheered, and Marcus, the friend whose wedding had started all of this, wiped away tears and said, "About damn time." The reception was casual and warm, with mismatched furniture brought up to the rooftop and food from their favorite local restaurants instead of expensive catering. They danced to music from Ethan's phone, and Lucy demanded at least 6 songs with both her dad and Charlotte, and the sunset over Manhattan was absolutely perfect. Late in the evening, after Lucy had fallen asleep on a pile of coats, and most of the guests had left, Ethan and Charlotte stood at the railing looking out at the city. "So," Charlotte said, "we did it. We really did. Any regrets?" Ethan pulled her close. "Not a single one." "What happens now?" "Now we go home. Wake up tomorrow, make breakfast, take Lucy to school, go to work, live our normal, beautiful, ordinary life." Charlotte smiled. "That sounds perfect." "It really does." They stayed there for a while longer. 2 people who'd learned that love wasn't about fairy tales or fantasy rescues or grand romantic gestures. It was about choosing each other every day, through the mundane and the magnificent, through the struggles and the celebrations, through all the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of actually building a life together. Ethan thought about his novel, about the ending he'd written where his characters chose reality over fantasy. He thought about how he'd gotten it right without even knowing it at the time. The best stories weren't the ones where everything was easy. They were the ones where people fought for each other, grew together, learned to be better than they were. Where 2 impossible worlds somehow found a way to coexist, not by one consuming the other, but by creating something entirely new. 5 years later, Ethan would publish his second novel, a love story about a single father and a CEO who met at a wedding and learned that sometimes the most unlikely connections are the ones worth fighting for. It would be semi-autobiographical, and reviewers would praise its emotional honesty and realistic portrayal of modern relationships. Charlotte would read it and cry and say, You got us exactly right." But that was still to come. For now, on this rooftop where it had all begun, they were just 2 people who'd taken an impossible risk and found that love, real love, was worth every terrifying moment of vulnerability it required. They went home together, to Lucy and their dog, they'd gotten the dog, and their apartment that somehow felt like it belonged to all of them equally. They lived their life with all its beautiful ordinariness and extraordinary moments, and they were happy. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, not without challenges and occasional arguments and moments of doubt, but happy. Genuinely, sustainably, real life happy. And that, as Lucy would say with her 6-year-old wisdom that had grown into 11-year-old certainty, was exactly how the best stories were supposed to end.